Hey, Chad, Eridanus. What's up, guys?
What's
Morning.
up?
What's up?
GM.
GM. Anything exciting going on, Eridanus?
Not that I can think of. No, nothing to see here.
Something happening?
It's honestly insane just how many things are always constantly happening, and like I feel like every single week it just always gets better and better, even though price might not always reflect the reality, but like the reality is that things just keep getting better and better for THORChain every single week, and this week obviously included in that.
Yeah, I mean, the rate of things changing right now just feels bonkers. Like, just every day there's something new shipping or right around the corner. And now the lending discussion is back on. It's so fucking exciting.
Lending, woo! I'm kind of thinking wallet integrations.
Wallet integrations are top of mind for me. There are a few exciting ones in the mix right now. There's been some whispers on Twitter, but yeah, keep an eye out for a big one coming up soon that we've been working on for a while. Um, I think it's going to make a lot of noise. I think it's going to bring a lot of volume, and they're one of the biggest names in the space right now, especially in the self custody space. So it is very exciting.
For sure. I just tweeted earlier this morning about how 2023 is just going to be like integrations galore. You always said early on, and you and I, Eridanus, talked about this, that like the first dominoes to fall in the integration world are the most difficult to kind of push over, in a sense, that the most time consuming, the most hand holding, the most our documentation isn't quite as clear in the early days. We don't have as good as SDKs in the earlier days, but all that's being developed and built and making it so much easier. So like those first few dominoes of the integrations are the hardest ones to push over, and then just everything kind of waterfalls after that point. So I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spent a lot of time over the last few months like tailoring the integration experience. We've overhauled the docs. We've built new endpoints into THORnode to make estimations for swaps and savers as easy as possible. We've built metric dashboards that we can track. I mean, every day I'm tracking all of the swaps from all of our integration partners, tracking the amount of refunded swaps, working directly with the teams to tailor their integrations to make them as accurate as possible, to minimize the amount of refunded and create the best experience for their end users. And we're going to continue pushing on that. I mean, that is literally my number one priority, and we have a lot of people working on that. And the next 6 months, I think, are going to be massive. And the other amazing part is that we have, we have all these other teams that are going after integrations. We have THORSwap, who's absolutely crushing it. XDeFi, Rango, they're getting plugged in everywhere. And slowly and surely, like THORChain is just behind the scenes executing those cross-chain swaps. And so we have such a massive like workforce just hammering these integrations from all fronts. And I think it's going to be kind of like an exponential situation where we have these big dominoes falling like directly for THORChain, but we have all these other teams that are landing these massive integrations that are just going to kind of push volume through THORChain continuously.
Yeah, I think part of this whole integrations thing is just the legitimacy that comes with the integrations. Because I mean, you can kind of write off like THORChain as a whole protocol if you're like, oh, I've never heard of that, I've never used it, like I don't know where I would even access this type of thing. And then all of a sudden, it's just in your wallet, and it's in other wallets. Say you are a wallet yourself, and it's in other wallets. People are integrating it, and it's basically a cosign for a THORChain, saying like this is like a legitimate swap provider. They have transparent rates, and this is what we recommend for our users. And then the dominoes are going to fall very quickly as dominoes do. Start kind of slowly, and then it just knocks over more and more, and then just bam, just all the rest of the dominoes will fall themselves. And that's the future of the UX of THORChain, is accessing it from wallets or any other app.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, like, with recent events, just the importance of self-custody is, top of mind for everyone in the space right now. And that narrative is like that helps THORChain so much, because, I mean, if you're self-custodying your funds, what are you going to do to swap? Well, you have to use a DEX. And when you want to go cross-chain, what are you going to use? Well, you're going to use THORChain. And so as more and more people use ledgers or use Edge Wallet or Trust Wallet, that's going to drive the needle, and that's going to, again, bring more volume to THORChain, because we are well positioned to be the cross-chain provider for all of these wallets, and that's what we're getting after.
Yeah, and we're the only protocol in the world that actually provides this kind of service, right? So like it's kind of an obvious. It's kind of an obvious sell to integration, which it should be. I mean, there's more DEXs coming out into the future that will be, competitive with THORChain in the sense of being able to do cross-chain swaps, like ChainFlip, for example, and Maya and other ones that are coming downstream. But they're all like literally years behind, and we have a lot of time to like do all this integration work, and they're going to have to spend the time that we spent already on integration when after they launch, right? So like, we just have this massive edge on the industry. Really, the only ones that can do what we do, and it's the obvious thing, right? Like, if you're a wallet manufacturer, why wouldn't you want to be able to swap between assets within your UI? Like, it's going to become such a basic feature that if you don't have that feature, you just look ridiculous and completely out of date. And then it becomes like this thing of like, well, basically you have to integrate with THORChain, because it's like, if you don't, you look like an asshole, right? You look like amateur hour, right? So it's such a positive thing, and it's such a strong and valued reason to be bullish on the project, not because of bullshit partnerships that we see so many times of like, I remember IOTA said, "Oh, we're partnering with Microsoft." It's like, all it was, they just had an AWS account. That was the extent of the fucking partnership. It was such horse shit. But this is actually like legitimate, real trade volume. Like, this is fundamental shifting things here, right? So it's such a clear and obvious reason to be bullish on the project.
Yeah.
I'll add one thing. I'd say that in addition to 2023 being the year of THORChain, I think 2023 is going to be the year of DEX aggregators. So as Eridanus was mentioning, and this is something we brought up in the Rango space, I think either yesterday or Wednesday. But just like, THORSwap and Rango and all of these companies that are kind of exploring and building out products in the DEX aggregator space, I think are super well positioned. I mentioned on that space that I thought, this is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity just for DEX aggregators to basically aggregate all the different cross-chain swapping services into one unified API. And we're going to see people not only, integrating directly with THORChain, but integrating with THORChain just via being integrated with, THORSwap's DEX aggregator API, for example. And the economics of those relationships the incentives are perfectly clear. The DEX aggregator, they'll take basically a small affiliate fee, and then the wallet or the integrator, or the person who actually has the touch point to the end user, whether that's a DEX or a wallet, they also take a little bit of a fee. And it's a perfectly sound economic incentive system where everyone kind of basically is rewarded for serving traffic and for getting people to do swaps. So I think that pattern is going to come, is going to really, really come into start to solidify in 2023, and we'll start to see a lot of companies that pop up that just do basically that, is trying to route together all the different liquidity in the cross-chain universe. And I think that the way that they're going to differentiate themselves is like who can offer support, but also in some way, like, it's up to those DEX aggregators to choose what sources of liquidity they consider high quality. And so people will come to like trust the Rango aggregator or trust the THORSwap aggregator because those teams can provide some sort of support on that, in case some like swaps fail or whatever. But I just think that like them being able to stand apart by like saying like this is your easiest way to tap into the most, the highest quality of liquidity with the best prices. And so yeah, that just seeing that whole strategy take shape for just the swapping side of things has been really cool. And I'm excited to see how more UIs and more maybe we can talk about that today. Some of the additional UIs that are going to be coming for savers, and then maybe we can also start to talk about what does lending look like as a product. And I think that kind of would segue nicely into today's discussion.
Hey, I'll tell you a very funny short story relating to that. I just did an interview with Ivan on Tech. I think it was yesterday or the day before. And the reason why Ivan on Tech had me on the show wasn't because of like, I DM'd him or we paid him money or whatever. It was because he tells me that he's building a wallet himself with his team, I guess, and he wanted to do like cross-chain swaps as part of his wallet. And he's like, "Where do I go to cross-chain swaps?" Like, "Oh, THORChain. Like, who from THORChain can come talk to me about like, is it easy to build on top of THORChain? Like, is there an SDK?" And so he had me on. We had a kind of technical conversation about how a wallet can interface with something like THORChain. Like, it just became like we got noticed by a big influencer in the space just because of the merit of what it is that we're doing and how uniquely positioned we are to do so.
That's marketing. That's when they ask you to come on because you're actually serving some kind of purpose rather than all these paid chills in the space. That's marketing right there, offering a service that people want to use and there's good incentive to use, and then they use your service for their own service, right? Just a bigger ecosystem of wallets and things that'll be using THORChain as swaps.
I just want to say, I think that's a really cool idea. You did it as a Twitter space, Chad?
No, I did it as part of his like podcast YouTube show or whatever. So the episode hasn't aired yet. I'm assuming it's going to come out, sometime soon. I don't really know exact dates or anything like this, but it was a really good conversation, and we went into some good depths and technical talk and speak and that kind of thing. And so it's I encourage people to check it out when it comes out. But it was a good combo, and he's got a large following, which will kind of hopefully awaken some people and to take a rune pill and check out what we're doing.
Yeah, that's really cool. We should start like open sourcing those conversations when we talk to people about building products on top of savings or building products on top of swap. If we're even, if they consented to it, and we could publish like videos basically explaining, when we explain THORChain, when we explain how to integrate with it, and people have those like sort of light bulb moments about, just how easy it is and how powerful and how much, it unlocks for them. Like I think we should just start trying to compile those and put those front and center in our docs, like almost like just like the video tutorial or video walkthrough of like what is THORChain.
Yeah, absolutely. And we even talked about affiliate fees and how like him integrating THORChain into his wallet could generate yield and generate income for to pay his engineers and pay the devs to continue to add new features and such, and how that's an important component of the THORChain mentality is creating the correct incentives that any wallet or exchange that wants to interface or integrate would get paid to do so, right? Not just out of the goodness of their hearts or their interest of a new feature, but it also will generate income.
Totally. Speaking of video walkthroughs, Chad, you put together a great overview of the lending design this week, and there was a lot of good feedback about that. Do you just want to summarize quickly sort of what that is and how things are going with that?
Yeah, I mean, if I gave like a quick few minute kind of like summary of that 1 hour long video, it basically just says that the lending design that we've come up with is just structurally very different than every other lending design that ever existed in the DeFi space. And it offers a unique characteristics or attributes like 0% interest, no liquidations, and no expiration of your loan, which just makes it extremely low risk loan. So it appeals to a different kind of user than the ones that typically use like what you would use on MakerDAO or whatever, where you're just trying to 3x long your Ether position. You can do that here as well if you really wanted to, but likely the CR, the collateralization ratio, or the LTV would be relatively high. or low from the LTV perspective. Um,
So most people are probably thinking to themselves right now, how in the world can a protocol offer a no liquidations loan? Why would a protocol ever want to hold someone's collateral forever and just let them run off with a loan? That's probably what most people are thinking. So do you want to tell us why this design is so novel and that we almost want people to do that?
Yeah, the best case scenario from the network's perspective is that people open loans and they just never close them. Like that's actually like if I could wave a magic wand and do something like this, then if that was the case, then like the lending design would be the best thing ever, and it would cause Rune to pump to some crazy high quantity of value. Obviously, that's not reality, but that's just the best case scenario. And the reason why that is because when you come up to the network and you want to take out a loan, and you provide like $10,000 in value, whether that be BTC or ETH or whoever the asset might be, doesn't really matter. And you basically are burning $10,000 of Rune off of the table immediately, right? And then we immediately mint back, some subset of that. Maybe let's just call it like $3,000 in value. So you're like a net negative 7,000 Rune removed from circulating supply in that scenario. Now, it doesn't really matter what happens to the price of Bitcoin after that fact. It doesn't really matter what happens to the price of the dollar after that fact. The reality is the current state, while your loan is open, that the network as the lender, right, is profitable. Like it's already made its profit. It's already done well. It's already very happy because you gave us a bunch of money. We gave you far less money, and we're obviously doing quite well over here because we just got all this free money and we gave out far less, and we're all as happy as clams as the protocol is. Because unlike other lending designs have like its market on both sides, meaning that the market users provide the collateral and also the debt. And so they're providing both sides of that equation. And in this case, the protocol itself is the lender, and then the user is the borrower, right? So even in the scenario where the collateral, the Bitcoin goes to zero or whatever, it doesn't really matter, and the debt becomes like, quote unquote, insolvent. From the network's perspective, it's not insolvent. It's actually still quite positive. We don't really give two shits. And if the Bitcoin price stays at zero for forever, which obviously that would never happen because Bitcoin's a great asset, but just hypothetically speaking, let's just call it like Terra Luna or whatever. Then like that's the best case scenario from the network's perspective. Like you just burnt 10,000 Rune, and then we minted 3,000 Rune, and then that's going to be that way forever. In which case, the Rune holder, the protocol, the lender is like happy as fuck about it, right? Because they just reduced the supply for basically nothing, got a bunch of free money, right? And that's a good thing for the protocol, for the Rune holder. So that's partially what makes it so valuable as a lending design, is that it's not that the network is more aligned with the user, right? Like in normal lending designs, it's the lender versus the borrower, right? Like the lender wants to profit and the borrower wants to borrow. And generally speaking, when one's winning, the other's losing, and one's losing, the other's winning. And in this case, it's a little bit different. It's more like the lender is more aligned with the user in some sense. And so like if you don't pay back your loan, that's also in the network's best interest, right? If your collateral goes to zero, that's also in the network's best interest. If you pay back your loan later on, and depending upon how the Rune price versus the asset price have changed, like that also could be in the network's best interest as well. So it's like it's got a lot of places where the network like benefits, and very few places where the network doesn't benefit. And so the idea is that over a longer period of time, the network will win in most cases and lose in some cases.
All right, so let's dive into the mechanics of it a bit more, because I'm sure people are wondering, like, how is this all possible? So can we just talk about quickly how does this lending design differ from a traditional collateralized lending design like Aave?
Yeah, well, in something like an Aave, you have somebody walks up and they provide a bunch of like collateral, whatever that be. Like they're putting up value capital to be lent out, whether that be Ethereum or like USDC or whatever asset that might be. And then somebody else comes by and says, "Oh, I want to borrow some Ethereum, so I'll put up some collateral, and then I'll borrow some Ethereum, and then I'll pay an interest rate to the person who provided the the debt. And then, we have to make sure that the collateral doesn't dip below the value of the debt, because then the person providing the debt would be, like in the red, and they would lose their money, which is obviously bad. So instead, what they just do is they do liquidations. Like generally when the collateral is like 110% of the debt, then somebody can come in and basically like buy out the collateral and zero out the borrower, right? And the borrower keeps their debt but burns their ether, which was their collateral asset. And that's just kind of pinning two different people against each other in a sense.
Right. I was going to say that's like the classic PvP and DeFi that we see. People, they see thin liquidity on centralized exchanges, and they realize that someone, won't be able to buy up enough of the token to, defend their position. So they get, they basically hunt them and liquidate them. So how does this? So what you're saying is that this lending design inherently doesn't pivot to oppositional parties against each other. It's actually more of a symbiotic relationship between a borrower and the THORChain protocol itself.
Yeah, that's generally true. Like there's nothing that if you take out a loan, there's nothing that I can do to like attack you, right? Like as a borrower, you don't really give two shits about the rune price. If the rune price is diving 50% or something like this, you don't care because you're not exposed to it, right? You're only exposed to your collateral, which is like Bitcoin, for example, and your debt, which is basically the dollar. So you don't really give two shits about that. So even if I were to try to drive down the value of something so that I can quote unquote liquidate you, which I can't liquidate you because there's no liquidations. And if I were to do that, it wouldn't benefit me at all, like as an attacker against you. So it becomes very straightforward, very, very predictable, right? I think that's the kind of the greatest value of the lending design in some senses, that it's extremely predictable what the conditions of their loan is and what they're going to be in a month and what they're going to be in 30 years. Because it's so predictable, because you're not going to get liquidated, and you're not going to get interest rates, and you're not going to have something happen all of a sudden to you. If there's no sudden movement that can happen that can totally screw you out of the situation like you can in a typical DeFi loan. And because of that, that loan is just super valuable, because now you can actually do things with it without being worried about getting fucked. Because everybody who's taking out a loan in DeFi, how stressful that shit is. You've been staring at the ETH price, making sure it doesn't go below $1,000 ETH or something like that before you get completely fucked out of all your money. Or you're just staring at the interest rate that's being charged upon you, which is completely variable based, like it is on Aave or Compound, and it can inflate to 30 or 40% one day just because markets kind of deem it to be, and then you're paying some massive inflation interest rate on your loan, which is just you get totally fucked in that scenario too. And so there's no fuckery here, and so because of that and having that predictability, it just becomes the most valuable lending design we have in the entire industry.
Okay, how can we offer that? Why is that something that THORChain specifically can offer? And I think it's what about THORChain's design? Why does it make sense to add this to THORChain?
Why it makes sense to add this to THORChain is because the act of opening a loan always net burns a bunch of rune, and by net buying and burning rune, so you're selling whatever your collateral is, we'll just call it Bitcoin, and then you're buying rune, so you're creating buy pressure on the rune asset, which causes the price to go up, and then you're also burning that rune after the fact, which also causes the price to go up, and then by that effect, you're causing the rune value to increase, which means that both the value of the bond and the value of the pools is increasing. Even LPs profit in that scenario just because they have a leveraged position on rune as a dual-sided LP, and so when you're burning all this rune, they're getting the yield that a regular LP is getting within the pool is going to be it's going to be inflated, it's going to be increased. So it just all around, nodes make more money, LPs make more money. Savers don't, but other than just increased possible trade volume, but they don't make any direct income from that. But that's okay. They don't want to be exposed to the rune asset at all. That's the whole point of savers. So it's very beneficial to the network, and allows us to have $10 billion in the pools, and maintain economic security.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was alluding to, is that Thor, just by virtue of being a cross-chain AMM and having deep pools in all of these assets and having deep pools in Bitcoin, Bitcoin has been previously inaccessible to the DeFi world because no one had the innovation or the technology to be able to pool it on an AMM in a decentralized way. So,
right.
THORChain is pretty much the perfect protocol or product to add lending onto because it's already, has an efficient mechanism for attracting L1 liquidity, which is via its cross-chain swapping. And then as we see cross-chain swaps and integrations start to proliferate and more people start to come into savings vaults, we have deeper pools, which makes lending even more attractive.
Right. Yeah, having the best lending design, like the most sexiest lending characteristics by far, and also being able to support basically any chain and more or less any asset that's huge. That's groundbreaking. That's nobody in the industry cannot come anywhere close to touching that. Everybody's just like way the fuck far behind in that sense.
So, Jed, I think the next thing we should talk about is why it's safe for THORChain to implement this type of lending design. And I think your explanation the other day was really interesting. Like what you were describing was that when are people going to close their loans? Is when, say they took out a Bitcoin loan, it's when their Bitcoin collateral has gone way up in value, because then they can buy back their Bitcoin for a lot cheaper than the current price is, right? With that, so they didn't sell it before; they just took out a loan on it, and they can just pay that collateral. Sorry, they can pay that debt back and get their collateral back for a lot cheaper. But the bad case for the protocol is when they pay back those loans when Rune has depreciated value compared to that Bitcoin. But it's just I don't know if you want to go into this part of it, but it's just the fact that as Bitcoin rises, Rune will also appreciate in value over that longer period of time in which the person will have this loan out. And so there would be a net decrease in Rune because people aren't going to be closing loans as Bitcoin's value is decreasing because it's just economically not there, to get that Bitcoin back.
Right. Like in a bull market, and this is just true for almost any asset. It's just this is like a general truth, and you really can't argue with me on this. But in a bull market, altcoins will generally outperform larger market capped assets, right? And that's partially because it doesn't take a lot of economic pressure to push a lower market cap asset, 10% up, versus the amount of economic pressure required to push Bitcoin 10% up is obviously, far more. It's because of this kind of this idea is why altcoins generally almost always outperform major assets in bull markets. As of course, there are exceptions to that, like Ohm or like Luna, that just kind of completely collapse because they're not built on solid foundations. But generally speaking, if you're like a reasonable alt, you will perform quite well relative to the larger market cap assets. It's the opposite of that though during the bear markets. Like the altcoins will underperform the larger market cap assets for a similar reason. But in our case, we're actually quite okay with that because in a bull market, Rune will naturally outperform larger market cap assets. It's always been true historically, and it's been true for many years now. And in a bear market, when we start seeing everything go down and Rune is underperforming the asset, which by the way, in a bear market, Rune can underperform the bear asset and still net burn Rune. If you work out the math, that's actually true, but it doesn't even matter so much, just because in a bear market the collateral will drop far below the debt, because in a bear market things go down like 95% or 90%, which is just how it happens in every bear market. And in which case that scenario is like nobody would close their loans in the bear market because it just doesn't make any sense to spend $1,000 to get like $200 worth of Bitcoin. Like that's just a silly deal. And so people will only really close your loans when their collateral is performing very, very well. And in that scenario, if Bitcoin is mooning, most likely there's a very high chance that the Rune is also mooning, not just because the macro kind of deems it, and we're susceptible to macro as any other coin is, but also because Bitcoin's price and Rune's price are directly correlated, like in a direct way. Because when Bitcoin's price goes up in value, that means the Bitcoin and Rune pool is now out of balance. The Bitcoin side has more value in it than the Rune side. So some arbitrage bot needs to go out into the market, buy some Rune, swap the Rune for Bitcoin out of the Bitcoin pool, and then carry on. So inherently, whenever there's buy pressure on the Bitcoin asset, there's always buy pressure on the Rune asset as well. And how much buy pressure there is on the Rune asset is relative to the depth of the pool. So very shallow pools will not have a strong correlation, and very deep pools will have a larger correlation to those two things. So there's a strong correlation that Rune will actually, move in the same direction as Bitcoin in general. And if you look at it historically, like any random day, like just pick any 24-hour period, like generally Rune will do whatever Bitcoin's doing times 2. So if Bitcoin's up 10%, Rune will generally be up 17% or some number like this. And if Bitcoin's down 5%, then Rune will probably be down 10% or something like that. You can almost look at every day and watch it closely, and you'll see that's mostly true. It's not true every single day, but it's mostly true.
Right. That was just one of those things that spoke to me about the design a lot, and just something that I've just been thinking about since you mentioned that, where the worst case for the protocol is that, Rune gets inflated back into supply. So taking out loans that burns Rune, and then paying back the loans that remints some of that Rune. But just from these regular market dynamics, I mean, it's going to need to be proven out in the wild, but you can see the logic there, where the collateral dips below. People are not going to want to pay back their loans, and thus the Rune supply will not net inflate. And also the opposite, where people pay back their loans when their collateral has gone way up, and that is the permanent, and that difference of the Rune price is the net deflation of Rune in that particular loan. So I think it's just very, very clever design. I can't wait to see how it works.
Yeah, even in an extreme scenario, right? Let's imagine a worst case scenario where Rune is underperforming, it's not doing well. Something happens to Rune, let's just say there's an exploit, or the SEC announces an investigation, or something happens specific to this asset that causes the price to go down 50% or something like this, right? And then everybody starts freaking the fuck out. I don't know why they would, because as a borrower, you don't really give two shits about the Rune price, but let's just say markets are irrational, which sometimes they are, and they just start to panic and start closing their loans in that scenario, and we start minting a bunch of Rune. You might think that's the worst case scenario for the protocol, but in reality, because there's such a panic and everybody's doing these massive trades and swaps through the layer one pools, in that moment, the virtual pools will also be very, very shallow in that moment as well, which means that somebody might have 2 Bitcoin in collateral, and they're panicking, they want to get their collateral back. And because the shallowness of the virtual pool, they only actually get back 0.5 or some number. It depends upon the scenario, but we'll just call it 0.5 of their Bitcoin. Meanwhile, the other 1.5 just stays burnt as Rune. And so we don't see a net inflation of the Rune asset, even in that crazy extreme scenario where markets are irrational and people are panicking. That's why this design is so fascinating, because in the Terra Luna collapse, those who left early were rewarded with better rates, and those who left later got increasingly fucked, right? And in this scenario, it's the inverse. Those who are panicking will screw themselves out of a bunch of money, and they'll burn Rune forever, which thank you, sir, I'll take another. Those who are patient and rational and not emotional can just wait a little bit and then close your loan later. And most likely, whatever the FUD event that is occurring is it'll probably just kind of go away and dissipate on its own after 24 hours or whatever it is, and therefore the patient people won't feel like they need to close their loan anymore, because the FUD is dissipated by that. Most time, some FUD events happening, it's not a 3-week thing. It's a 24 hour thing. So it's a natural kind of incentive that cause everybody to slow the fuck down and not to massively dump their shit, and just to wait and be patient and get the full collateral later.
Yeah, really interesting part of that is that burn feels very permanent. When you open a loan and it burns, there's essentially a claim to remint it if you were hypothetically going to close that loan right away, right? Other than a little bit lost to fees. But the burn that you're describing is not really reversible in any sense, right? Like that's just a permanent burn.
Right. That's just like in any market, it doesn't matter if you're talking about crypto anymore or not. Like those who act irrationally or panicked are the ones that buy stocks when they're high and sell them when they're low. Like those are the kinds of people that are like giving away free money to the patient people. Like one of the core concepts of THORChain's design from day one was that money moves from the inpatient to the patient. Even as a swapper, if you're impatient and you have a large trade, you're going to pay a lot of money in fees, and the patient people, meaning the LPs, will generate a lot of income, and they're happy about it because they're being patient. And the impatient person is just like burning money effectively, which is just this happens in like this general markets for thousands of years. Like this is how money moves in markets. This goes from the impatient to the patient, and this same design of the virtual pool depth is kind of like instigating that same or pulling that same kind of a primitive, right, where the impatient people are going to pay a lot of money to the patient people, right? And so like the patient people in this case would be like the rune holder, and the impatient people are people who are like panicking and fudding for some fucking reason, whatever the hell that reason might be, and they're just like burning a bunch of rune and like, all right, well, I'm just going to give the value of my collateral to the basically the rune holders, and then just going to dissipate in a way that just like makes everybody's rune more valuable, right? So it's even in that extreme scenario where there's some sort of mass panic, it's like the protocol actually would hold up pretty well. People might get pissed because like, oh, I had two Bitcoin collateral, and I only got back 0.5. I feel gypped, but at the same time, it's just like, well, yeah, you made that choice to do so. Like everything was transparent, everything was clear. You could have put a closed loan limit on your thing that would cancel a loan if you didn't get back the full two Bitcoin amount, but you didn't do that, so that's on you. What do you want me to do? That's just the rules of the system.
Yeah, definitely something UIs will have to make really clear. You had said that even if Rune is underperforming, it can still be net deflationary. Is that the mechanic driving that, or is there something else going on as well that can keep it deflationary in those times?
So like when Rune has to in a bull market, Rune has to overperform the asset, right, in order to be net deflationary. The reason why that is because it's not just the collateral we're talking here, like the BDC, but it's also the debt, which is like dollar terms. So when we open say somebody has like a $5,000 debt, right, and we open the loan, we mint, let's just say 3,000 rune to equal the $5,000 and that they get in debt. And then later on, when they close it, they need to pay back that debt, that $5,000. But because the rune prices increase, maybe they only need to acquire, to burn 2,000 rune instead of 3,000. And so there's like a 1,000 deficit just in the debt side, the THOR side, the USD side. And that's what creates like that kind of how Rune has to overperform Bitcoin in order to make up for that kind of like 1,000, differential. But in a bear market where Rune is underperforming, where we minted 3,000 to give you that $5,000 debt in the open loan, and then later on you come back and you're like, well, now you need to burn 4,000 rune instead of 3,000. So now there's like a net negative 1,000 just on the debt side. So now Rune can underperform Bitcoin by like 1,000 rune, so to speak, right? And then still be deflationary, right? That's why it's a little bit counterintuitive. And if you spend time with the math, as I have, to kind of play with it and figure out the behavior of it, it's a little bit complicated. But that's why there's it's not just like a rune to add to collateral, like 1-to-1, like which one's performing better. It's a little bit more complicated because you have to include the performance of rune versus the dollar in that context. Does that make sense? It's a little bit complicated. I'm not sure if I explained it well, but it's a little hard to explain.
It does. I need to spend a little more time with it for my smooth brain, but I'm getting there. Yeah, I mean, I think what we could maybe get into more is like the concern people have mostly probably as they dig into it is like, what if there's a bunch of loans on like Doge or something and it just gets like memed into the stratosphere. can you just like walk, just to kind of just back to basics? Can you just like walk through that, like that situation where an asset really overperforms, and like where does the risk really come in?
Yeah, so in that scenario, so let's call it Doge, right? Because Doge has the ability to pump, as we've seen in the past. And so Doge goes to the moon one day, and then people decide at that point that they want to close their loans, or maybe to close them and then reopen them a moment later for more to kind of refresh their loan. In that scenario, what would happen is the network would have to mint more room than it burnt when they opened the loan in order to repay that loan. So there'd be a net inflation of rune in that particular example, until, like, as Doge always does, it like drops to fucking, it drops a shit ton. It's a very volatile asset for obvious reasons. And so in that case, it could be a net inflation on the rune asset. But I would also say that the sheer quantity of loans that can exist has a relationship to the depth of the pools. Right. So Bitcoin obviously is the deepest pool. It will probably have the vast majority of loans will be Bitcoin based collateral loans. And there'll be some Doge loans, I'm sure, but it wouldn't be, a huge quantity. And so there'll be a direct correlation between like the depth of the pool and likely the market cap of the asset and how much loans there are. And so there'll be a natural skewing of like more loans to the deeper pools and the larger market cap assets like Bitcoin, and less loans going out on the smaller market cap, smaller pools like Doge, for example. And so that those kind of pose much less risk because there's just not going to be that much exposure to the Doge asset in general, just because the pools are so much like, thinner or smaller, or shallower than what we see for like Bitcoin or Ethereum or one of the larger assets. So they do pose, the smaller cap assets like Doge pose a larger risk to the network in some sense of their ability to like moon is much higher than the ability for Bitcoin to moon, just because it's much more space for it to move up. Like Bitcoin's not going to 1000x, right? But maybe Doge could. Like, I don't know. Like it's kind of hard to say, but it's possible. It's a higher risk, higher reward asset, Doge is, over Bitcoin. And so, but there's a direct correlation and a strong tendency to have more loans on the safer assets, which is like Bitcoin, and less loans on the smaller cap assets like the Doge and the Litecoin and the ones that nobody really gives two shits about.
Cool. Just a reminder, like, it's open for questions from the audience. So I'm sure there's a lot of different lending questions. So if anyone would like to hit the request button and come up at any point, otherwise we'll just keep riffing off of the whole lending design up here. But open for anyone to come up. I saw there were some requests and people drop it up and down. So
yeah, I can definitely throw out some more questions in the meantime. Why don't we start with the 500 million hard cap and explaining how the reserve could kick in, and then I have some. Do you want to just explain that, and then I have some follow-up questions?
Right. So the biggest concern that people have about the lending design, since there's like a burn and mint like mechanism, people think of like, oh, why won't this fail like Terra did, where it went from a few hundred million circulation supply to like 1.3 trillion circulating supply of the Luna asset, or whatever the hell the number was. And the difference here is that like there actually, like, that was just, I mean, there's a ridiculous quantity of like fixed rate income and that just was unsustainable, and we can get into that. That's a different kind of conversation. But in this context, like, there's the network is maintaining its current monetary policy, meaning that the supply will never increase beyond 500 million. That's not being changed at all. And so right now the network has like a 15 million rune kind of like buffer. Like if you look at the actual total supply of rune on chain, which is the total like that exists rather than the circulating supply, it's 485 million. And the reason why we're like kind of down 15 million is because of the kill switch. Like people just didn't upgrade their rune from BEP2 or ERC20, and their window is kind of closing on their ability to do so. And so there's this like kind of lack of 15 million rune that's kind of like was basically burnt as part of the kill switch effectively. And so we had this little kind of, buffer zone, if you want to kind of call it that, which is actually quite convenient and nice for the lending design. And so in the disaster case scenario where like something's wrong and just mass producing rune because people are closing loans and just like minting rune because the rune price is like not performing well for some reason, some FUD event maybe, I don't know what it would be, but something's happening and people are closing their loans and all this kind of happen. It's not happening too fast. If it happened too fast, the virtual pool would protect the network, but it's happening like a slow trickle, over a long period of time for some reason. And then once we get to that 500 million cap, the network says, oh, we need to mint like 10,000 rune for this guy who's closing his loan, or this girl closing her loan, but we don't have 10,000 rune to mint because we're already at the 500 million cap or whatever. So in this scenario, we would just basically, use the reserves rune. We'd borrow 10,000 from the reserves rune and swap it for Bitcoin or whatever their collateral asset was, and then give them their collateral and they walk away fine. The most important thing to make sure that lenders know or brother borrowers know is that if we don't want people to close their loans, like we want people to open loans and leave them open, we don't want to create any incentives for them to close a loan. So that's why there's zero interest rates, and it's why there's no expiration, because there's no pressure to like close your loan at any given moment or time. And then the other really kind of important component of that is to make sure that they feel that they can close their loan at any time and get their collateral back, right? As long as they have confidence that that is a true statement, then, there's no reason to close your loan. There's no reason to panic. There's no reason to FUD. There's no reason to do these things. And so by using the reserve rune as kind of like the backup, it's really there just to kind of give you that confidence to the borrowers to like, don't panic. Like if we just said, when you get to the 500 million cap, that's it, and nobody can close their loan and like you're now screwed, then everybody's going to panic, right? And everybody's going to want to close their loan. They don't want to be the last loan to close and be left the one holding the bag and kind of get screwed. That creates FUD. That creates, a mad rush for the door, which we don't want to see happen. And so by using the reserves rune, it kind of just instills that confidence that, you know what, you don't need to panic. You don't need to rush. You don't need to, run to the door, so to speak. You can just chill because, you'll get your collateral whenever the hell you want to get your collateral. And there's no reason to think that you won't get it.
So the part I'm still a bit fuzzy on is ensuring how the reserve doesn't get depleted too far. So I know you've said like there's a cap, which maybe we can talk about the details of. The cap is how deep the loans can be based on the pool, right? But then let's say it's a bull market, so people, so the collateral value is up, so people might want to withdraw, and let's say at that time there's some kind of rune specific FUD event or whatever, and maybe even the pools are maybe LPs are even withdrawing, and then and rune prices going down, so then the loan amount doesn't change based on that, so there's still the same debt. That's just kind of a vague question, but that's the scenario that I'm still kind of fuzzy on. Can you clarify any of that?
Yeah, because so the reserve right now, I think it's got like 170 million rune in it, which is obviously a large quantity of rune. The pools themselves in total, I think, has like a little over 30 million or 35 million, somewhere in between there, of rune in the pools total. So if we cap the loans to be like, let's just give it a number of like 1-to-1 ratio, right, between the pools and the so that we won't lend out more than 33 million rune like openings, right? We're basically burning 33 million or 35 million, whatever the hell the number is, 35 million rune. Then in order to get to like put the reserve at risk, like the asset would need to outperform rune by like, what would that be, like 6x or something like this, which would be fucking nutty as shit. I mean, that's obviously mathematically possible. That's completely impractical. It's very unlikely to actually occur, but it's possible. Sure, it's very well possible. But also the act of somebody closing their loan and us, minting more rune to pay out their collateral would naturally cause the collateralization ratio to drop. To go lower, and by going lower, it creates more economic pressure for people to open up new loans and burn a bunch of rune, right? And so you have this kind of counter effect of markets to say, hey, the collateralization ratio is now dropped to 300% or whatever the hell the number might be, and that causes people to open up new loans, right, to kind of create space for other people who want to leave and close their loans, right? So there's a lot of like different kind of angles to think about it, but one of them is that we control how much loans go out, and so we control the liability to the reserve, and we're not going to just like release the caps from the loans entirely until we have good strong confidence from market conditions and from market behaviors that everything works as planned, and it's safe to do so. We'll start very small, see how loans work, see how the human behavior is, what is the collateralization ratio people are looking to get for a loan with these kinds of attributes, and we'll kind of study that, and then we'll like slowly kind of increase that kind of cap on the loans, and as we feel more and more confident. If things are like this thing doesn't work, it's unlikely that it's going to expose itself to not work like 3 years later. Like it's probably going to show itself to not work within the first 6 months or so, or a year. At least I would suspect. You don't really, I guess you really don't know until you've gone through like a full bear and a full bull market to know how like the market reacts to such a loan. But I'm not terribly worried about like burning through the reserve for this purpose, especially when the POL will be there to be like the POL will be just earning room this entire time as well. Like it just be generating income from just swaps and that kind of stuff. So there's that component as well. So I'm not really terribly concerned about it, especially in the beginning. But we should be conscious of it, and we should know that like as we increase the cap on loans and allow more loans to go out, that increases the liability on the reserve in some sense, or the potential liability. It doesn't even have liability actually, not until we get to a really bad place. But then the funny thing is that like as you release up the cap on the loans and more loans go out, which means more room is being burned, right? Like if we burn like 100 million room, right, out of the circulating supply, which is like almost like half the circulating supply right now, like what does that mean for the room price? Well, it means the room price is probably pretty fucking good, right? And it's probably outperforming Bitcoin by a good margin at that fucking point. And so it's just like the more loans that go out and the more burning that happens, the more economic pressure there is on the room price to push upward, which means that the more likely that all the loans that are currently out are net deflationary, a net deflationary status or like state. So it's just like this as the more loans go out, it actually does make the network safer in some sense, as counterintuitive as that might sound.
I brought up 2 listeners. Let's start with Francis. Hey, are you there? Also, Arno.
Hey, maybe I'll just jump in real quick while I can. Very impressive. It's a complicated design. I gotta say, for more simple-minded people like myself, I definitely remember, and I probably will remember the Luna Terra thing. So when you speak about burning and minting, it is giving me some anxiety. I know the design is very different here, but it is hard to wrap our minds around. And when it's hard to kind of understand, it's harder to trust. It's kind of like you're just trying to give a third person's view. But we're speaking about reserve.
There's 2 major things to worry about. Like if your concern is like the Terra Luna thing, whatever, there's 2 major things to remember. One is the monetary supply of Rune is unchanged. It's still hard capped at 500 million, so you're not going to see this massive inflation to create this massive FUD that we saw. And then the other thing is, what was the other thing? I had something else in my mind, and it flew out of my mind.
Well, the thing I liked was this auto balancing thing, where as the reserve starts going low. I mean, I don't know if there's a scenario where the reserve could get depleted, but I guess
that would be extremely difficult to occur. I mean, technically, it's mathematically possible, sure, but the reserve will always exist just because it's always generating income. It's depleting now, and it's designed to deplete now. And it's going down over time. And it's like each block is emitting less Rune than the previous block, just how the math works out. It's kind of like a continuous happening that's happening instead of once every 4 years. It's going down. But the difference between Bitcoin and this is that it actually generates an income from swaps, from transactions, from Thor names, from other mechanisms that just generate income for the reserve. And so there'll be a point in time when the block emitted is less than or equal to the income to the reserve, and it'll just like stay still at a certain place. And then if you pay a bunch of IL at that point, or you close a loan, then you have a situation where the block emitted is less than the income, which means that the reserve will slowly be built up until it reaches that kind of like balance point. So like it'll always be there, even like in a billion years. It'll like always, even though there's a circulating supply, a hard supply of rune. Even in a billion years, it'll be like effectively an infinite supply of room within the reserve in some sense. Oh, I remember this. The second thing about the Terra Luna thing is that the difference between Terra Luna and this is that Terra Luna had uncapped the UST asset. This kind of like we create some artificial incentive of 20% fixed rate to create a massive, crazy demand for the UST asset, and we allowed the system to get top heavy, and so it became too much. Kind of like the guillotine got too heavy above the Luna neck in a sense. And once things started going south, like everybody saw that waterfall coming down, and they knew the result for Luna would be, a crash. And so everybody dumped their Luna as well. So in this case, you don't have that because there's actual relationship. This thing can never become top heavy. I guess it could become top heavy if we decided to make it top heavy, if the community made that choice to do so. But that's something that has to be decided upon. In the beginning, it could never become even remotely close to becoming top heavy and actually holding a large guillotine in any sense. It couldn't really have much of a threat at all, actually, especially in the early days. It just depends on how much we want to open it up. Do you know what I mean?
Another key difference is that the THOR, the USD accounting internally, and these derived assets, they're not tokens that sit in your wallet. So they're only tied to opening and closing loans. So there's no scenario or there's no reason where you're just minting the shit out of it or burning the shit out of it. Like, it's only tied to opening and closing loans, which keeps it really contained. And just like Chad said, it doesn't just create infinite demand for a stable coin, for example, that you can just deposit for an arbitrary 19.5%, and then there's it just goes to infinity. It doesn't have that mechanic, so it's a lot more controlled.
Arno, did that answer your question? Okay, he's down already. Francis, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey.
So I got a few comments and a couple of questions, I guess. Just a quick tale real quick. I checked my email earlier this morning. I was trying to get a loan with a banker. I've never gotten a loan before. And I was looking back at this email conversation, and it was 44 emails over a couple of months to try to get a loan less than $10,000 so I could get a car to continue working. And I failed to get the loan after 44 emails. And then I looked into something like Aave. I took out a big Aave loan, but I didn't lock in the car just because I wanted to make sure I could sleep at night with this Aave loan. And I could not. So I just wanted to say that your story that you've told a few times, Chad, about the guy who wants to get a car or whatever the fuck to improve his life. I'm that guy who's waiting for this product. So thank you.
Boom! Right there, in the flesh. There's Francis. You are the person that I'm building this for. You are the reason why I want to build this fucking thing. To allow you to buy a car so that you can get to work when the traditional finance system completely failed you after 44 fucking emails and 2 months of conversation on a $10,000 loan. And then you didn't want to do the Aave thing either because it's risky as all shit. And it's just like dangerous for you to do so. You are it, man. Like, that's it right there. You heard it here, people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chad. So the other thing is, you put out that video the other day explaining the lending, and like I've been looking at all the videos recently, trying to understand it, and since your video, I finally started to understand the lending a little bit enough to criticize it, and. So my criticism, okay, so you've said in the past that during a bull market, a lot of the prices are going to go up for all these coins. But from what I've noticed is, yes, that's true. A lot of these coins that people will be able to take loans out will go up, and Rune will go up as well. But from what I remember, the coins generally take turns to pump. They take turns. So let's say it's Doge's turn to pump, and it moons versus Rune. That's when people will want to close their loans, as far as I can tell. And then AVAX, they time their avalanche rush so that they can moon versus other things. That's when people will want to close their AVAX loans, etc. Like all these lower cap things that could potentially moon versus Rune. The way I see it is people are most incentivized to close their loans when they moon versus the rest of the assets, which includes Rune. So that's a concern I have. The other thing I wanted to say was I had a thought experiment earlier was, what if Rune is like same market cap as Bitcoin? Like Rune makes it, Rune is the same market cap as Bitcoin. Then in that case, people are still able to take out loans versus all these other small market cap things. Everything will moon versus Rune because Rune's market cap is too large. So everything will expand Rune's supply in that scenario. And so I know you've said in the past that you don't want to have like all this voting and such for what you allow to have a loan and what you don't allow to have a loan. But isn't it possible to make some sort of objective measurement of, just have number of market cap, like you must be in the top 3 or whatnot, just in order to ensure, because eventually it just seems like when you take it to the limit, everything will cause Rune to inflate the more successful Rune is.
Yeah, so let me address those 2 points. So the first one he said about Doge mooning one day and Rune not mooning just because maybe Elon Musk tweets again or something like this to cause Doge to pump. Like that situation is very well possible and probably will happen at some point in time. The reason why that's not a problem in my mind is because we don't really care about the day-to-day or this one pumps this week and that one pumps that week or whatever it is. What we want to know is what is the aggregate, right? Is most loans closing with net inflating or are most loans closing and net deflating? That's the real question. And to be honest, I don't have an answer to this question. I don't think anybody has an answer to this question. We won't actually really know until we actually try it out and see what happens, right? And that's part of why I want to start the thing small and scale it slowly over time, is just let's just see what the market behavior is. And so that might be the case that we see a net inflation in most loans. And if that's the case, then maybe we just cancel the feature or maybe change some attribute of it or, do partial liquidations, which is another idea we've thrown around in the past, which I personally hate, but, it's more structurally sound for the protocol. And so we can talk about that stuff, but we don't really know the answer to that until we actually try it out, which that's partially what I'm excited to do. Your first question was about the Doge pumping. The second question was about, remind me what that one was again?
Well, it was just a thought experiment for if Rune is a giant market cap coin, everything will cause it. Every loan will make the supply inflate because
right.
Rune's market cap is too large.
Right. So in that case, a hypothetical scenario where Bitcoin and Rune have the same market cap, which would be, obviously quite insane. Rune would have to be thousands and thousands of dollars per Rune to get to that place. So congratulations, everybody's holding Rune right now because you've done pretty well for yourself. I think we can talk about that as a community if and when that ever happens. And I don't expect Rune ever to be anywhere close to Bitcoin's market cap, to be honest with you. Bitcoin is a much different use case. It's trying to be money in some sense, and nothing's bigger in the world than money, really. So I don't really personally expect Rune to ever really be competitive to Bitcoin and market cap. But, if if that does happen and I'm wrong and Rune does extraordinarily well and it's one of the biggest assets on the fucking planet, then, we can come back together as a community and have this conversation and debate about whether or not we want to continue doing lending or change the design somewhat or whatever. But for right now, it's not really something I'm terribly concerned about.
Okay. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say was I do hope that this feature scales slowly because as far as I can tell, all the potential seeds that could cause it to, have inflation happen, all the seeds are planted in the bear market, price depressed Doge with a loan taken out with a price depressed Doge is the seed that causes inflation later on. So I guess that makes me hope that it's scaled slowly, so we can see, you know, at least a few bear markets to see like what actually happens when those seeds are planted in the bear.
Yeah, the speed of which this thing scales is determined by the nodes, right? These are going to be configurable things that we decide upon. Like we will decide upon what percentage of the pools do we want to be loaned out, whether it be 10% or 50% or 200% or 10,000%, like whatever that number is. And then what is the range of CR to start from 100% to 1,000% or 100% to 10,000% or 500% to whatever. All these things are just configurations that the node operators basically can control. And so the speed at which we scale this thing is just up to the community to decide how fast they want or how slow they want to scale this thing.
All right. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks, Francis. Patrick, you there?
Yes. Hey, Ben. So my question is not specifically on the lending product. It's kind of on these features in general. It's maybe a Nine Realms question. I'm curious. You mentioned a lot of integration partners your team's working with, and I was just thinking that, you know, as more and more features are added to the protocol, and there's more and more integration partners, then there's obviously like more risk exposed to all these integration partners. So I'm just curious how you're navigating these conversations around like adding more features, you know, because this impacts these other companies' products. If there was something, you know, if there's some systemic risk to a new feature, obviously it can impact these other companies' products and their business. So how do you navigate those conversations? And then are those integration partners also interested in taking a stake in the network in terms of nodes, liquidity, and whatnot? Thanks.
I don't know if someone from Amram wants to answer this question. If you guys don't, I will.
Yeah, I can take it. Yeah, I mean, so of course, with these new features, there's always risk. There's risk with even just cross-chain swaps in terms of, you know, users getting refunded or whatnot. And of course, there's always protocol risk. So, you know, the risks of each feature are the first thing that we kind of go over with these integration partners. And that's, you know, one of the big pushes is to, you know, document all of the risks associated with any feature that they might be interested in. So yeah, I mean, it's super important, and I mean, it's kind of choose your own adventure for each of these partners. I mean, we have wallets that integrate cross-chain swaps first, and then want to kind of go into DEX aggregation, and then that's a, you know, whole separate conversation. And then they want to get into savers, and that's a whole separate conversation. So that, you know, they usually start with cross-chain swaps as like the starting point, and then depending on what their users want, we go into these other conversations. And you know that. Any time they have questions or anything like that's like, you know, that's the most important thing, is making sure that they're aware of, you know, the risk associated.
Yeah, how do you see them maybe getting more involved in governance in the future, in terms of having a say somehow? Do you see that as being a thing? Do you see these companies interested in being nodes as well?
Let me jump in, because I'll also present sort of a counter scenario to where one of the wallets that we talked to recently, they're one of the biggest companies in the world, so you probably know them. But when we sat down and talked to them, they were actually initially interested in the savings and the earn product. They wanted it to be, you know, something that they could seamlessly integrate for their users into their wallet, and THORChain is something that could do that for them. So their first question to us, when they were kind of just doing like the initial vetting and due diligence, was, you know, where does the yield come from? Everyone in the space knows, you know, if you don't know where the yield comes from, you are the yield. So with them, you know, we kind of had to explain to them, look, the yield actually comes from cross-chain swaps. So it's in your best interest, if you want to, you know, launch this product and you want to make this product successful, that you should also integrate cross-chain swaps, because, you know, integrating one, you know, and not the other, you're not really doing your part to sort of like even out the demand and the supply in the system. So we're very straightforward with them. We say, look, you know, like the risk is that you implement this feature, but your users don't get the yields that they want. In order to ensure that they get the yields that they want, you should also implement swaps. So having those conversations is it's definitely, you know, a bit of a process to get them there on like sort of what are the risks, but also what are the things that they can do, that they can specifically do to help mitigate those risks. And, you know, I wouldn't say that we've had any of those conversations yet about telling them, hey, you should take a stake in the network or get actively involved in its governance. But, one of the things that can scale, for example, savings vaults, like if we start to hit the security cap, one of the things that, someone can do if they want to, increase the capacity of the savings product is to start to take an actual position, or to take a stake in Rune itself as an asset, to buy up Rune. That will increase capacity and increase security and increase the capacity of the savings vaults. So, there are certain ways that we can explore, and those are conversations that, we would love to start having with the bigger companies, the bigger wallets. I can't really say much more, but basically, them taking a position in THORChain, I think, would be a mutually beneficial thing. And, given the scope of Rune and what you can do with, savings and swaps, I think it would absolutely make sense for those companies to take large positions, run their own nodes, get involved in the governance process.
It's not even to mention the increased decentralization of the network, given these companies running their own infrastructure, bonding their own Rune, that's just another entity that has some kind of say in the governance of THORChain, and someone else decentralizing increasing the Sybil resistance of THORChain by making more nodes with more bond. So not only does it directly help the network in that way, but it helps the network become more decentralized and get to the place where we need to be, where there's hundreds and hundreds of nodes and hundreds of entities running those nodes and administering the network.
I think it gives THORChain political, essentially political power as well. If you have multi-billion-dollar companies that are aligned with you and your product and your vision, they have a stake in your protocol, they're integrated with your features. They have a stake in your success, and they want to see your success. And so, if we get, imagine a world where we get all of the top centralized, decentralized exchanges, wallets, consensus, everyone in all of crypto is on board with THORChain and owns a little stake and runs a node and is integrated with, that just makes THORChain even more uncensorable, because, you have allies. Having allies is important. And I think that by, strategically aligning yourself with other people's, goals and what their users are trying to accomplish, it only, enhances the position of THORChain.
Yeah, I think more likely than not, more exchanges will be running. I think in the future that all exchanges will have to be running Thor nodes, just as part of the full stack of just implementing THORChain swaps. And I think we will get to that point one day where these centralized entities and decentralized exchanges and things like that will all be running Thor nodes. And even just getting the Rune to do that from affiliate fees, not even having to buy Rune itself directly, just do swaps for long enough and eventually get enough Rune in order to run your own infrastructure.
That's a great point. I would love to see that happen. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see 12 of the validators, because it's important to have. It's important that and people always ask why no liquid staking? We had this conversation extensively. Why no liquid staking? It would be great if you guys could support 10,000 validators. And it's kind of I kind of want personally, and I don't know if this is the right thing, but I would love if THORChain just had 200 validators, people that are spread out across every single geography and jurisdiction, but that the average THORChain node operator was a highly intelligent, highly profitable shop or a protocol or an extremely wealthy investor or individual. I somewhat think that there's merit in having the decision making about THORChain's future concentrated amongst people that essentially have a lot of capital, because it means that they're going to have a team. They're going to do rigorous analysis to protect their investment. The things that we're talking about on this call, node operators deciding collateralization ratios or deciding what pools should get protocol owned liquidity or whether to enable or disable impermanent loss protection. These are all incredibly important things that require a studied interest in THORChain, and it's not just up. It shouldn't just be up to a layman or any Rune holder, Joe holder, to make those decisions. Only the people that are actively contributing to the security of the network and that have literally spent millions and soon tens of millions of dollars to actually participate in those discussions and in those votes should have that right. And that might be a bit of a unpopular opinion in a populist sort of ecosystem like this, but I think that what we're building, there's too much at stake to just kind of be willy-nilly about that decision making. So I think that like when it comes to getting big players involved in taking a stake, like I welcome that, because it means that there will be more people with intimate knowledge of the space and the mechanics of DeFi to help us with this decision-making process. I look forward to the day when all of these conversations that we're having right now, we're having them with the entire industry, because they're going to be the ones that have a vested interest in what the outcome of those decisions are. And I think it has a potential to be perfectly harmonious. But yeah, that's to be seen.
Thank you guys for so much. Appreciate what you guys are all doing. I'm really glad I stumbled across this project. It's been really fun to learn everything. Been waiting for this for many, many years. Many years.
Sweet. Thanks, man. Let's go to Birchalarge.
Hey, thanks for taking this time. I've been kind of busy with everything and a little bit out of the picture, but could you guys talk a little bit about just the integration strategy? Are you guys targeting specific projects, especially kind of on the liquidity integrations? Or are people coming to you, or do you have a target list that the community might be able to help for? And if I've missed this for just being dialed out, but I really feel like we're at this great point where if we get the right integrations, it could just go really quick. So I just would love to hear how you're thinking about targets and what you want to do.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Nine Realms, as a team, we manage a list of potential integration partners, and they kind of fall into different camps. Like they might either be like a wallet or a DEX or a DEX aggregator, things like that. So we kind of divvy them up into different camps, and that kind of affects like what the integration would look like for them. So yeah, top of mind for us right now is wallets, of course. And so we have basically a hit list of wallets that we're either in talks with, or we're helping them scope out the integration, or they're in the progress of integrating. And we kind of manage this status list as we go through. Our list is pretty exhaustive. Every now and then we'll just kind of reach out to the community, like with a Twitter post, like, hey, what wallet do you guys want to see THORChain swaps in? And we'll kind of take that into consideration. And we have pretty good connectivity throughout the industry. So we're usually able to get like a pretty close introduction to the team. And then we just go from there. So that's kind of our strategy. And I will say that like inbound in terms of people just reaching out to us has never been higher. And I think as we continue to kind of roll out these larger integrations, like that's just kind of, again, like talking about those dominoes, like one big one falls and a lot follow. So yeah, I mean, anyone is welcome to reach out if they have a project in mind that they think should be integrating. And we will follow up immediately, get in contact with the team and start scoping. That's kind of the progress.
Perfect. And just a quick follow up. What about kind of disconnecting wallets from the network? It seems like, I don't know if there's risk there with stuff that's just not creating the volume and not working out. Do you guys think about...
You mean disconnecting chains?
Yeah, a little of that, just a little we're such a transitory period where not everything's going to make it. And I just want it to be efficient and not have different vectors and just maybe the better way is resources on your end going to the wrong places, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we already disconnected THOReau, and that was kind of like a first. We didn't really foresee that happening, so it was kind of like a live fire drill. But we got that done, and it did end up having an impact on the network, right? There's definitely something to be said about being selective about which chains that you choose to add, which kind of goes back to the whole thing of like governance and nodes needing to like really take careful stock of what chains that we add, not only because it increases the operating expense of running a node, but and obviously that all that, but like just the risk that like a bunch of people start buying up your assets so that they can LP, and there's a frenzy around some project like there was around Terra. A bunch of Terra people bought Rune and then, paired it and LP'd it, and that was great.
Yeah.
We attracted like 30% of the net volume overnight became, not net volume, net liquidity overnight became Terra project related, so that when you saw that the collapse of Terra, there was also a collapse of the Rune price. But at no point did that ever really like threaten the project, which it was an amazing stress test. I would say that all of the events that happened this year were honestly that like you couldn't have asked for a better stress testing scenario. And although it kind of made me lose some sleep and have a little bit of stress, the network itself was resilient throughout everything. And so we've seen now, like, we talk about needing to battle test these ideas through bull and bear markets. It's like, yeah, we've battle tested them now. We're in a bear market now, and we were in a bull market in 20, and beginning of 21. So like, the dynamics of the system have been proven out, and yeah, we could go for another 2-3 cycles, but just seeing that like ILP and our liability on impermanent loss didn't like blow up, or that like there was never any sort of capital flight really from FUD or anything like that. Like that THORChain withstood the test of these last 12 months is extremely, it gives me a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I completely agree. It also just shines a light on just how important some of those decisions will be over the next year, kind of as the dust settles, like where you choose to build partnership and spend resources, to me seems to have a lot of will dictate kind of how successful the project will be over that 6 months to 2 year time frame. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you don't even have to tell me. Probably have been the most vocal opponent of adding things like Haven or Dash or any of these small cap projects. Like I think that if it were up to me, THORChain would just be the premier, cross chain swapping for BTC and ETH, and all the loaning and lending would just be on BTC and ETH. That would still be an extremely innovative project. But of course, there's tons of other L1s that are providing value in the ecosystem that we want to integrate with. I think Atom was a really great addition because it gives us access to the IBC ecosystem. Avalanche gives us access to a low gas EVM ecosystem. So there's going to be we should only add L1s to THORChain when they fundamentally unlock like a large new, think of it all as like a neural pathways, and one access to one chain can give us access to 100 chains by virtue of like some by virtue of the Cosmos IBC or low gas EVM bridges that allow you to hop between like Arbitrum and AVAX or something like that. So just like we should be really, really conservative about what we connect to, and only connect to chains that really do unlock fundamentally new like user bases and liquidity pools that would otherwise be stranded. Which is why I think Doge was a good one. Doge is stranded liquidity, and it has a very active user base. So yeah, I mean, like right now, if it were up to me, I would just say like we should just nuke Bitcoin Cash, probably nuke Litecoin, because I mean nothing really is happening there like in terms of development. Although they do have a privacy thing that would be kind of cool. But then just add BSC, and then just kind of wait on other things. But yeah, we should talk about impermanent loss protection. Do we have time to talk about that today? Do you guys want to get into that?
There's other people who have questions to ask, so I think we can wait on ILP for a bit.
Yeah, why don't we wait till next week? I'll probably have the ADR up for that by then.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And now there's some good solutions that we can come up with too. Like now that the solutions are all right here, it's just a matter of like deciding which one to take. So I think we're in a good spot for that.
Okay.
Let's go on to Shock Rocket. Hey,
I think Ken was here before that.
Oh, hey Ken.
Hey guys, how are you? Yeah, so I watched Chad's landing design YouTube video. First of all, like, thank you for everyone's efforts. Like, it's just been amazing to see this team working like more ambitiously than ever in this bear market. Really, just want to say that. There are really like cool parts about the design that I like. It's a design that I've like kind of studied previously, but needed a refresher. One thing that I want to sort of go through is when you take out a loan and then you close your loan. Let's say your loan is net inflationary. Where does the like inflated like rune supply end up? Do they end up in the pool at the end of the loan payment, or could someone remind me that?
Yeah, it effectively goes into the pool, and then out goes the BDC or whatever the original collateral they put in. And so yeah, effectively it ends up in the pool.
Okay, I see. Okay, was just curious about that. So the part that I really like about this design is like it's very counterintuitive. It's that like the depth is always in stables, and then basically like if your collateral is below stables, you're never going to pay back your loan, which is like pretty much like so like in this terrible like a bear market situation. All of that liability like isn't felt by the protocol because it's never gets realized. And then on the upside, now like you know, under normal circumstances, Rune is a smaller market cap than like the rest of the pools usually, so it should in normal circumstances outperform. But like the only thing that's sort of bugging me is like we have to be, I think, cognizant of like any like hacks or stuff like that are now like more sort of have like amplified impacts on people's behaviors. Like if, for example, you know, Rune sort of underperforms in a bull market, like there are now like added risks, right? Like one, like Rune is getting emitted like into circulation more faster, and then like ILP is another thing, but like you can see how ILP and this like Rune minting can like happen all together, and so like they sort of have an amplified impact. So I think like ILP will be a crucial with this design, like how we think about this. Yeah, those are like my initial thoughts. Generally, I really like the design under normal circumstances. I think it's going to perform great. I'm quite excited. It's just these like in the very edge cases, I think there are more now. Like THORChain is like pretty much becomes more vulnerable to these like edge case situations, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair way of looking at it, like an honest way of looking at it. I think the hope is that in those scenarios where these edge cases are happening, edge cases are kind of edge cases. They're only around for like 1% of the time, and the other 99% of the time we're in the normal cases, which is where everything is like going quite well. And so the assumption is that in that 99% of the time when Rune is being deflationary on these loans and then being inflationary on the edge cases, which is like maybe 1% of the time, that it's fine. Like the vast majority is still being deflationary, some are being inflationary, but the vast majority is still being deflationary, and so the network performs quite well even in those scenarios, like as a whole. The question is always about the aggregate and like how does the network perform as an aggregate rather than in the edge case scenario that you're voicing about.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. I don't want to take too much time. Just wanted to share my thoughts and my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Cool. Yeah, let's go to Shock Rocket.
Hey, a long time listener, first time caller. Kudos to Chad and the team. Love the team, love the project, love the lending design, love that y'all are turning the world upside down. It's all very, very cool stuff. I know the lending has been in the idea phase for a while and is on at least its second iteration. What all would need to happen for the idea to get greenlit as a let's move forward on it? Has any development been started yet? And what would be like best case, worst case as far as timeline goes for when it might actually go live?
Yeah, so development's already started on it. I've opened up a PR myself that does the derived asset code and logic, which is open right now and will probably be merged in the next few days or week or so. There's probably maybe one or two, possibly maybe three more PRs that need to be done in order to make this feature kind of complete. My estimation on when this will be like ready to go after like testing and validation and all that kind of stuff that we'll do on StageNet will probably be sometime like Q1. That's just my personal opinion. I think that's a reasonable time frame for launching this thing into the wild, and then we'll start to see how everything goes, how everything performs.
Awesome. Appreciate you.
No worries.
Nakamoto-esque. Hey, great spaces yesterday. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, appreciate it. Yeah, just thought I'd come on to chill out and see what was going on in the world of Thor. Yeah, I mean, not much to add apart from yesterday. I did talk to some people about how realistic it is to increase the consensus size from less than 100 to say 1,000 or something, and some people said that's it's going to happen at some point but low priority. But yeah, just love the project really.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I personally would disagree with that sentiment. Like, I don't think we'll ever see 1,000 just because we are limited by the Tendermint protocol itself and how many that one can support. I think the most we've ever seen Tendermint actually do in reality is about 250 nodes. But even if it wasn't that limitation and we could actually technically go to 1,000, I would doubt we'd see that just because of the amount of room that's required to run a node is so high and the competition so high that there's just not enough people who have that much room to be able to even run nodes to begin with. So I doubt we'd ever get to 1,000. I think we'll be at 100. We're close to 100 now. We might go to like 150 at some point into a bullish future, but I don't think we'll really see anything larger than 200. To be honest with you.
Chad, just for context, on his space yesterday, I was throwing out some crazy ideas about how we could, if we needed to scale, like if security became such a limitation that like Bitcoin just like couldn't, we couldn't stuff enough Bitcoin into the network to satiate all the demand. I was saying we could potentially spin up like THORChain subnets, which basically use like a different kind of rune and basically like beam that. Or basically use IBC to beam rune to like a Bitcoin THORChain subnet that like only validates Bitcoin transactions and pools additional Bitcoin, and then you'd just be able to swap the synthetic Bitcoin from that network like a canary network into the main network. But I mean, it's obviously still ideation, but I do think that there are ways to scale THORChain, like if the security budget gets completely maxed out. Or if there's so much demand that we need like a different validation network just to handle all the throughput.
Yeah, very early on in the development and design of THORChain, we actually had this conversation about like should there be a single network per chain and then network all these different networks together, and that was a design concept that was kind of examined. In the end, the reason why we didn't do that, other than just the overt complexity that comes with that, is that you're now having a different security model on a per chain basis. So maybe the Bitcoin chain is really secure because it's got 100 validators on it, and then the Litecoin one is not very secure. It's only got 7 validators on it, and then it becomes problematic in that sense. And so I think it makes more sense to me, at least in my personal stance, is just to maintain a single chain that everybody just contributes the same asset in there and grows it there. But if you wanted to get to 1,000 nodes, and then and you'd probably have to reduce the minimum supply of a node bond. Like, I don't think breaking it up into smaller mini chains and then using IBC to beam things across chains and such would be as effective to increase the bond personally. But maybe I'm wrong about
where
that.
are we at with like vault nodes? Like, is there do we still see any potential future for them, or is that kind of idea kind of dead in the water?
I mean, it's not dead in the water. I mean, we could totally go down that road. And so if anybody who listens doesn't know what a vault node is, like the idea there is that there's in scaling the network, there's problems of scaling it in the context of like being able to commit blocks. You can't have 1,000 Cosmos nodes. Like, this doesn't work. Tendermint doesn't allow such a thing. And so if you wanted to scale to like 10,000 people, maybe 100 of them are committing blocks, but 100 plus what the other 10,000, whatever it is, are running a node that has the same infrastructure, but is not participating, committing blocks to the chain, to the THORChain block, but is committing like to security, and it's like holding Bitcoin or holding Ethereum and securing the assets and being a part of a TSS threshold vault and Asgard vault and stuff like that. That's still possible, and we can look into that. But I think one of the issues we have to be considerate of is that the security of the network is not about the total amount of rune in the bond. It's only, you can only count the bottom 2/3 of the bonds, right? So the top 1/3 highest bonding people are not contributing to the security of the network, and it's only the 2/3 bottom side. So if you had 10,000 nodes all contributing, like vault nodes, whatever, then what does that mean for the actual security of the network? You might actually reduce security, even though there's a higher quantity of rune in the bond. The total actual security of the network might even be less than what it is now. It's counterintuitive and as weird as that sounds. But that just means that if I wanted to control enough nodes to steal, how much rune would I actually have to own to do so? And in that scenario where there's like 10,000 nodes and they're almost all my vault nodes, and each one's got like 100 rune in them, or 10,000 rune, something relatively small, then you might get into a problem where it's easy to control a large quantity of validators, a large quantity of Asgard signing memberships, and then you might get to a point where any particular Asgard really can't hold that much assets and still be secure, and then that becomes like a problem of like, well, if you can't hold that much assets, then it's not really offering much security now, is it? And so that becomes part of the argument or the debate about vault nodes. It's kind of complicated and counterintuitive, I know. I'm sorry if I didn't explain it particularly well there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the motivation of my question was just that, in the long term, I mean, if you're talking about having a protocol that's still going to be around in 50 years, probably having 80 nodes or 100 nodes isn't going to cut it long term, but it's probably not.
Well, why do you say that? Why is 80 or 100 nodes not going to cut it in your view?
Well, I mean, I don't know that much about the history of blockchain, but I am aware that there were issues with some of the DPoS networks like EOS, where you did actually see collusion eventually happen, because there were a certain number of nodes and it was like some number of dozen, and they eventually started colluding with each other and doing bad things.
EOS had like, I think it was an 8 of 11 or something like this, right?
Okay, I mean that's an order of magnitude smaller, but I think.
And all the people who were running nodes, everybody knew who they were, and they were all best friends and had like lunch on the weekends together. Like in THORChain's case, all the validators are anonymous. At least the vast majority of them are anonymous, and I don't really know who the fuck they are, nor do I really want to know who the fuck they are. So my ability to collude with validators or whatever, anybody's ability to collude with validators becomes extremely difficult because there's no way to communicate or connect. There's a process called Make Relay that allows them to communicate with each other, but that's only done through public forums that everybody can read that conversation. So there's no private DMs happening between validators, or at least really not enough of them to be able to collude and do anything malicious. Not to mention that the economics, support the idea that they're not going to do it collude, because they would lose a lot of money if they would.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's more of a, in practice, this is probably not going to happen. But if you're an uninterested third party looking at it, and you see, well, there are really only 80 of these operations, and that's it forever, then maybe in the future things will happen that can't happen now. Anyway, I mean, it's just a thought. I'm a bit of a newbie, so it is what it is.
Yeah. I'm personally okay with having 100 validators. Like, obviously more is better. I would like to see you guys to 150 or larger. But to me, like, the difference between having 100 validators and 150 validators, like, in terms of decentralization, it's like, like, how much is that really going to shift reality about, like, how decentralized the network is? Probably not that much, to be honest.
About 30%.
Yeah, I mean, you could put an actual number on it, but like, if the government were to attack THORChain and it had 100 validators versus 150 validators, how much that really going to shift whatever transpires after that point? Probably not very much.
Right. The thing is not always linear, right? Like, having 20 nodes is probably more than twice as decentralized as having 10 nodes, in a sense, or having 50,000 nodes isn't really twice as secure as having 25,000 nodes, right? Like, it doesn't really scale linearly in terms of just what's required to collude and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of early in the life of blockchain. I suspect there are still things that can go wrong that haven't gone wrong yet, but yeah.
Oh, of course. But also, the same point, like, every Cosmos chain is, like, even within the Cosmos world, like, we are actually one of the most decentralized chains within the Cosmos space, like, in terms of distribution across providers and across the world, and quantity of providers. Like, we are one of, like, our Nakamoto score is actually, I think, higher than the vast majority of Cosmos chains in general. But, like, if having 100 validators is like a problem for some reason or whatever, that just means that, like, the entire proof of stake network concept, whether that be Cosmos or even, like, Ethereum, is in a bad state, whatever that state that is.
Well, I thought Ethereum has basically stalled their proof of stake for years because Vitalik was so keen to be able to have hundreds of thousands of people.
That's we all know that's not really reality. Like, it's well and good to have the hope, but he's nowhere remotely. I mean, there's really only like five validators really in Ethereum right now.
The thing is, you have to look at like where the actual tokens are and like what the concentration of wealth on the network is. So there's a huge concentration of wealth on the Ethereum network. So even though there's 10,000 nodes that are running, that doesn't mean that there's 10,000 individual entities that have control over THORChain. In reality, there's only like 4 or 5, because there's these huge liquid staking protocols like Lido and Rocket Pool that allow you to send your ETH to them, and they run a validator on your behalf. So those companies are actually running thousands of validators, and that means that there's still one entity, right? Rocket Pool is an entity, exists in a jurisdiction. They run their servers in a geographical location therefore they are bound by the laws of that geographical location. I'm guessing most of Lido and Rocket Pool's nodes run on AWS, right? So it's having 10,000 nodes, but 6,000 of them run on AWS is no different than having 6 nodes and four of them are running on AWS. You get what I'm saying?
Right, like, if me and Pluto were the only people who were validators of THORChain, and we each had 50 nodes that we both ran, that wouldn't be very decentralized. Obviously, that would be just effectively just 2 validators, which would be a problem.
So just looking at the number of validators in a network isn't actually a good heuristic of how decentralized is it. It's how many different entities, right? Like, at the end of the day, an entity could be an individual who's a very wealthy person who bought a node and just acts in their own interest. And they might even be like a chaos actor, right? They might be someone who like wants the network to not do well, right? And so they could buy up enough rune and like attack it, right? but the network is more decentralized, having less people that are like really like if you get down to it, individually like exerting power over the network, right? So it like at the end of the day, you could have I think THORChain is cool because of how like anonymous and the fact that we don't know, like I have a good idea of like who some of the validators are, but like we don't know who all of them are. And it's just so interesting when in our governance process, we kind of have it set up so that we propose as devs, we propose, a course of action, like a software update, like a tangible change. We do our best to figure out what the consequences of that change would be. But then we also have a way of having nodes voice their opinion on that. They can literally like sign a message from their validator. So it's still like anonymous, encrypted communication. We know that this node expressed this sentiment because they encrypt with their private key that message, and then they send it to our Discord. So basically, we have a way of communicating with nodes without them doxing themselves. And that communication is essentially us putting out these ADRs and putting out these technical design documents and then having them vote on it, or even in some cases having them, say, exist an entirely different alternative altogether. And then we will revise the ADR and then, essentially start the vote with that new option. So I think THORChain has one of the most sophisticated governance systems, and it maintains anonymity. It keeps people really accountable to one another. Like you have to come with good reasoning if you want to like convince these people who you have no idea who they are. It's easy for me to convince someone, hey, vote for my proposal to, fund my thing or whatever, if I'm like buddies with them and we both, we both have been working on this project forever. But like, Nine Realms doesn't have influence over any validators other than like the ones that we run for our customers. And so we'll tell our customers, even when Nine Realms does we proxy all our votes out. So even when, and we're running, somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 validators on the network. But when there's a vote on something important, we proxy that out to our customers, and we tell them, hey, based on our read of the situation, here's how we think that you should vote. But we've had people vote against what we've told them to as well. So even in that sense, the decentralized nature of the decision making of the network is still disparate, and it's spread out, and it's not controlled by any one entity. So in that way, like I think that the Ethereum, for example, it doesn't even rank as well as THORChain in terms of true decentralization. You still have Consensus and Vitalik, who have a ton of the wealth in ETH concentrated, and therefore they have a huge say in how the network is actually run and how it's developed. So I would love if someone did like formal analyses of these things of governance in blockchains from like an extremely objective perspective, and had a really, really good methodology of presenting the research, because I find this subject in particular to be fascinating, and I think that it's going to be the subject of a lot of scrutiny. And I think the way THORChain is setting itself up is positioned to be on the good end of that scrutiny.
Yeah, that's what they call the Nakamoto coefficient. That's kind of its point, is to objectively measure the level of decentralization of any particular blockchain, whether it be Bitcoin or THORChain. And THORChain does quite well on that measurement.
But even the Nakamoto coefficient doesn't take into account like human structure, organizations, and structural things. Like Consensus essentially operates as sort of a mafia of sorts, right? Like they have
it should. I mean, it takes into account like Bitcoin pools, for example. Like that's considered to be a single entity in its ability to censor things or whatever.
Oh, it does. I didn't realize.
Yeah. That's why the Bitcoin score for like Nakamoto is like 3.8 or something like this. The last time I looked, or something like this. Just like not that great. And I think THORChain's at like 5.6, I think, or something like this.
Who does those rankings? Who does that research and decides that?
I mean, it's not that hard to calculate it. I mean, you can just look at the Bitcoin pools. You can look at the number of THORChain validators, or the number of unique bond addresses to figure out how many unique individuals are running nodes, blah blah blah, and like you can do all that mathematics. It's actually not that hard to throw together.
Yeah.
It's big blockchain, man.
It's easy to create the perception of, if I wanted to gain the system by sending bond to a new bond address for every single validator I bonded, we could easily do that. So I think there's a bit of a delta between the facts that you can just look up on chain and what the actual reality is, and I would love to see more people doing research.
We can't know the actual reality. Like, we have no mechanism to do so. So we just go on based on the data we can collect. That's the best information we have, right? Like, I don't know. Does it, like, 9 realms use the same bond address for all the nodes, or does it use different addresses on each node?
It's not. No, it's not. It's neither. But I think there's a way to do that. I know, but it'd be interesting. If you want to get into the chain analysis, you could look at like the THORChain pre-mine, see all of the, the nodes that went to the team. Not the rune that went to the team, and then whether they actually like use that to bond nodes. I feel like this type of in-depth research is possible for any chain, but I think that there, I'm just saying that our methods of calculating this type of stuff are still extremely primitive. And I just think it'll be the area of a lot of research going into the future.
Fair enough.
Yeah, cool. I just find it fascinating. What really controls blockchains at the end of the day. There's so much misunderstanding of between like the layman of like how decentralized is a network and the reality of it under the covers.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Ethereum probably has some kind of, as you said earlier, a bit of a mafia going on with Vitalik and various people who got into the pre-mine and stuff like that. But I mean, at least they have. They could at least say, look, it's not perfect at the moment, but in the long term, we hope to really kind of distribute this coin to a lot of people, and there will eventually be 100,000 real, genuine individuals. Of course, Ethereum has liquid staking, which is a big problem for Ethereum because the game theory of that is the biggest staking derivative wins, and then it actually all just centralizes again. So I don't know if they've worked out a way to solve that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big elephant in the room. It's like Lido Finance, they're bound by U.S. laws, I believe. If that's correct, that means that like if OFAC came to them and said, hey, you have to like start basically censoring transactions from these addresses, like they would more or less be compelled to do that. And if 2/3 of the node operators on the network have to start censoring transactions, then you've effectively censored the network itself, right? So I could see how it could be quite easy to censor Ethereum. And there are people who there are entities that are already attempting to do that. Like, I think that's something that we see happen, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think Coinbase is actually one of the biggest validators of Ethereum, and it's also an American company, so it's under that same jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Still have a few people requesting for questions. Let's go to Crypto Scholar.
Hey, everybody on the THORChain team and listening. Thanks for all the work. I had a couple, maybe a quick point, a quick question, and maybe a follow-up. I think the discussion on decentralization is really great. I think one thing that doesn't get brought up enough about the THORChain protocol, I brought it up on Nakamoto's stream yesterday, actually, was the concept of churning and ragnarocking the consensus. I think this is 100% unique in the POS ecosystem, and also the fact that it's anonymous delegation and not on-chain delegation. These eliminate, I think, a tremendous range of or a tremendous amount of long-range attacks on the protocol. And I can't see how this doesn't make it heads and shoulders above all the other proof of stake models that are out there. So this is like a big plus for the THORChain protocol. I think I said it yesterday, where I believe that, people or organizations looking to develop sophisticated DeFi protocols will implement some kind of similar approach. The other maybe quick question I had is I think I came into the call a bit late. I know there was discussion on lending, but discussing this, on the Twitter chans here, and I think it's a good concept, and I understand it. I think there's some, as you mentioned, I think just a few minutes ago, that communicating to the market is a big challenge, as you said, in the blockchain space, because there's such a gap of understanding between the people who are building the tech and the people who are going to end up consuming the tech. And I think there was some confusion I was having around whether or not, proper conventions, proper general accounting principles are being applied to some of the lending designs. I just wanted to ask if there's maybe a person that's operating as a type of CFO for the project, or whether there's an organization that's been engaged to do that, to basically oversee designs and provide an objective outside opinion as to the efficacy and sustainability of such designs like the lending protocol, and whether or not it's compliant with the general accounting principles and regulations, etc. And then maybe a quick follow-up.
I can take this one. So the idea that that there's any principles that established accounting principles that can be applied to this design is, I don't see how that's possible. It's so utterly new and innovative that you can't read about in a textbook how synthetics and lending are supposed to work, and how derived assets, right? These are literally concepts that that Chad and the core team have literally sent down from the heavens and blessed us with. Now, Nine Realms as a somewhat independent, we're still technically an independent entity, right? We came onto the scene after THORChain had already been invented, and so we sort of act as this third party that's sitting here and vetting these things. The core team says hey, we freaking literally got hit by a lightning bolt of genius insanity, and it's our job as Nine Realms to essentially go and start picking it apart. So there exists that sort of semi I won't call it adversarial, but there's this sort of we are the entity that is challenging with scrutiny some of these ideas, and I think part of the reason why it's gone back and forth for so many iterations is just this healthy dialogue that is being facilitated between our teams and their teams, and all of these dialogues happen out in the open in the developer Discord. So we have all of these people ranging from traditional finance professionals, mathematicians. There are some brilliant people that come and jump in and are working on contributing to this lending design. So I think overall sort of the design is very much out there. It's being vetted by a lot of people. But I think one of the difficult things in this ecosystem is getting your designs vetted. It's almost impossible to know whether there's some obscure attack vector, or whether some mathematical genius will be able to figure out how to manipulate your protocol to extract value from it. That's really that's the nature of the industry that we work in, is that the people that are smart enough, or the people that are qualified enough to actually come up with those attack vectors and to do those audits, they're not sitting here getting paid a measly 100K or 200K or however much, whatever you think would be a good amount to retain some official or some auditor or some person. However much they're getting paid, there's more money for them to be earned hunting protocols like Avi does. And so you're never going to be able to pit an organization like that against someone like Avi. So really all that we can do is have a robust bug bounty program where we pay out, and hopefully there are some white hats out there that are smart enough to to poke holes in this thing, and if they do, we'll pay them out. And if not, that's it's just our confidence and our understanding of the system and our rigorous research collectively as a team and as a community that we have to basically come to the table saying we believe in this. But I don't think that there's any third party entity that can, put their seal of approval on something that's like so new and innovative. They just don't exist, and they don't have the requisite understanding of THORChain's design to be able to actually to have a criticism unless they're really close to it. So that's just Chad, you can go off.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, the person in charge of making sure this all works and such, or reviewing it is you, Crypto Scholar. Like, it's really, it's Pluto, it's Crypto Scholar, it's Chad THOReau, it's myself. It's like it's the community's job to. This is why we talk about it publicly. It's why we don't just implement it and secretly and just like push it through and forcefully. Like, we don't do that, obviously. We talk about it. Myself and other people come together with ideas and concepts of how we can, improve the protocol, and then we float it publicly to the community for everybody to read it, understand it, ask questions, like debate it, whether it be through Twitter or through these spaces or Discords or whatever. And then at the end of it all, we just kind of determine as a group and as a community whether or not this makes sense to do or doesn't make sense to do. And that means, like, we didn't do the original THORFi design that we originally floated like 10 months ago, just because the market's changed and people's opinions changed on like algo stables, for example, and and we backed off and we did something else, and we came up with this new lending design. We came up with the Savers design that was more agreeable to the community. Like, that's really the process. Like, it's up to the community to validate these things, not so much looking to some third party.
I don't disagree at all, and I think obviously the public discourse is important. I would push back on one concept, though, that this is beyond comprehension or learning, or is like, let's say, credit default swaps, insurance contracts, in all manner of complex derivatives have been developed by many different people over many different years. And I guess one way I would tie this in is that it goes in line with, let's say, the economic security audits as well as the technical security audits that I think really helped legitimize the THORChain project very early on. In addition to just a white paper, there were other sources of validation, and I think as an opportunity for business for the project and the product is that, let's say, and just for a weird, strange argument, let's say the community raises funds, we hire Price Waterhouse Coopers, some ancient TradFi institution that's never going to really understand it, but and probably really be skeptical. But walking them through it and getting them to understand it, I think, is an opportunity to create tremendous partnerships outside the realm of, let's say, the crypto bubble. And I just think that's an opportunity to get people who are highly skeptical to understand the protocol, and the biggest skeptics become the biggest evangelists. So that's just my concept around having some kind of, let's say, quote unquote formal stamp of approval, is because I think it helped the project early on. And I think in terms of business relationships and communications to the market, it could help very well.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like, I don't really care much about like the meat space. For me, I just care about like just thinking with first principles, not subscribing to an old world view of things and then that being the starting position. I think I start from more of a first principles perspective of like what would be the perfect design that for lending, for example. And that's what we started lending from the get-go, from like almost a year and a half ago, about like zero interest and zero liquidations and that kind of stuff, because that would be the most perfect thing that we can come up with. And how do we actually accomplish such a thing? I don't really care to like try to convince TradFi of this design or whatever. Just like, I'd rather just build it, launch it, let it prove itself, rather than get into these friggin' hours and hours long debates about what that lead to nowhere. Like, I mean, I was a part of, we hired Gauntlet in the early days of THORChain to validate the AMM model and the slip-based design and all these things, and they were analyzing it and coming up with all these different graphs and like these simulations of blah blah blah. And that took so fucking long. And to be honest, like, we would do these meetings like once a week. We'd meet with them and they would show us like the progress and all these things. And like, we think this would be a problem because of this X, Y, and Z. And then myself and another person would be like, well, not really, because you didn't really account for this and that and the other thing. And like, oh yeah, we didn't really think of that. Like it was constantly just trying to like curve them back onto the road because they just weren't even fully understanding some aspects of the design, even themselves after a year of conversations and whatnot. It just became just like a huge time suck, and I honestly it ended up just not providing much value in the end of it all. So for me, I'm just like, I just want to think about it, put it out in the world. People can challenge it, ask me questions, tell me why I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, then explain it to me, and maybe I am wrong. Like, we can try something else. But like in the end, we built something, we designed something I think we're very proud of, or we're very bullish on, and we want to try it, put it on the world, and see if it works, see if it floats. And if it doesn't, then we'll go back to the drawing board. And if it does, then we've revolutionized lending in a significant way.
Well, there's, it's 100% agree with that also, because of course it is revolutionary, and this has never been done. It's a holy grail achievement, but there's also a distribution problem. Right? Just because we build it doesn't mean they're going to come. And part of that is communications, and general accounting principles in mathematics is 1,000-year-old field going pre-abacus. So I don't necessarily think we should just say we don't want to figure out a way to communicate to people who come from, understanding finance in the way it's been understood for many, many centuries. And when there maybe it just is a matter of coming up with a better way of communicating the exact same mechanism, right?
But I don't want to go to those TradFi people and try to explain to them what it is that I'm trying to do, or what we're
Chad,
trying to
it's
do.
not your job. It's not your job to go to those people and to tell them and to explain it to them, right? And I think this is an incredibly productive conversation. But I think it's important to remember who is responsible to different people in this. In you can think of it sort of like, I'm not going to say as a pyramid. You can think of it. Don't think about it as anything, okay? Right? There's different people that have different essentially responsibility to different people in this network, right? The developers are responsible to the protocol and to the node operators specifically, because the node operators are the ones that run the network itself, provide the security, right? So essentially this is a dialogue between the developers, the community, and the node operators to decide what's best for the protocol itself. And so
Right.
that is a process that we've seen works really well. And then from there, it's the responsibility of people who have a vested interest in THORChain itself. You could call them bag holders, you could call them early adopters, you could call them community members, whatever you want to call that group of people. It's their responsibility, if they want to receive traction to THORChain and to these ideas and get people to start using them, to get builders of product in the community on board with those concepts, to get the THORSwaps of the world, to get the Coinbases, the trust wallets, to get all the people who would actually potentially take this idea and present it to their users. It's our job to go and communicate that to them. And so I think what Crypto Scholars is saying, is pointing out here is super important, is that we have to have a line of communication to people to explain to them across all gamuts of industry, across the crypto ecosystem as well as the TradFi ecosystem. If we really truly want adoption for this, it's important that we be able to go out and have those conversations. But I think it's important to delineate between the building of features and then the propagation of features, and those are, I think, fundamentally different roles that need to be played. So I think that like, from the perspective of Chad as a developer, yes, I get that you don't need to have those conversations. Like you should focus on like, proving it to yourself and proving it out to us, because, realistically, we're the ones that are going to have to go out into the ecosystem and explain to all these people why they should build a lending product on top of it. Right. But so I guess I'm just saying it is good to not think that it's like the protocol's job or the core dev's job or even Nine Realms' job to like try to solve all of these problems. But there's going to be different people sort of in the conversation whose job it is to go out and do that. And so it's just important to have the conversations. And I think that we're doing a good job of it.
Yeah, but one of the important things about DeFi, what makes it so successful, is it allows people to experiment and innovate without worrying about fucking crazy amounts of regulation and like, you know, red tape to cut through. And
no, I would never suggest that you listen to them. I would never suggest you listen to any TradFi people and what to develop. Let me just give you an example, right?
I don't want to talk to those people, and I'm just going to build what I want to build and get the community to hopefully agree to.
You don't need
launch
to,
it.
yeah, and Brashad, you don't need to talk to them.
And then later on, once the thing's actually launched, and you can have all this data, like you can't argue with the actual data. You can't argue with fucking reality. And if it's actually working, then it's actually working.
Okay. I'll make a quick comment because the conversation goes a little bit off the rails as to what I was trying to communicate. I want to give you just a little example. Okay, so I was one of the original Bitcoin meetup founders in North America for a group back in 2011. And one of the absolute most just tragically frustrating endeavors to do was to talk to people about Bitcoin in 2011, 2012, 2013. And one of the first things you have to explain to them is they're not really coins. Right, you're not sending money from your device to another device. You're signing a transaction. You're registering that transaction on a ledger. That's not a system of coinage. But if the original developers of Bitcoin had sat down and just figured out that it was just a simple convention challenge, I guarantee you, I and many other advocates for Bitcoin, like 10 years ago, would have been able to get tremendous more traction for the concept just by alleviating that simple conventional misunderstanding that created a tragic barrier to adoption. And I think really sabotaged the original first gen protocols tremendously. And I would never suggest to a developer, I'm a developer, I'm an engineer, I know, I would never listen to an accountant or somebody outside of tech on how to design an actual technical feature. But in terms of communicating that to the market, I think that's where we have to just understand that there are people out there who have no clue what is going on with this tech, and the adoption of blockchain technology in the broader space is all about communications. And that's just my only suggestion. Yep. Like we just take a step back and think is like, how do we communicate to like parents who have mortgages or college students coming out of college, you know, what this is really about, and using, you know, just standard conventions and means of communication can tremendously eliminate a lot of the barriers to adoption.
Yep. Thanks, Crypto Scholar. And that's one of my personal goals. And that's kind of what we do on these spaces, trying to communicate with people about what THORChain offers. And, you know, we do this very often, going from, we do these spaces like we did yesterday. Like we had a great space just talking about THORChain from like the ground up, like the fundamentals, the basics of it. And then, you know, we have these more in-depth spaces where we go into Q&As about things that aren't currently released, discussing it, debating it, and also adding on to a little bit of what Pluto said earlier. Can
I just jump in real quick? I just want to say, I completely agree with you, Crypto Scholar. I think that it's so important how we communicate and how we influence the public perception of the products that we're building. And I would personally take you up on that. If you wanted to sit down with somebody with me and someone from my team and someone from, you know, PricewaterhouseCoopers, I would absolutely take the time to explain to them all of this stuff and work with them. I think that I you know, it's like not everyone wants to do that, but I think that you'll find that there are people on this project who would be interested in having those conversations, because I think there is a lot of wisdom that we can gain from TradFi and from people who have, you know, been working in capital markets for, you know, decades.
Yeah, I'm happy to engage on that. I'll follow up after. Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to speak. Thanks to the team. Keep up all your hard work.
Can I add something?
Thank you, man.
Sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, Muna?
Yeah, I just want to like add something to the earlier conversation. And I totally kind of like agree with Crypto Scholar and Pluto, because I also kind of like get where Chad is coming from, because he's a developer. And there's kind of like something different about the THORChain protocol, in the sense that something else is meant to be built on top of it. You know, it's like the community is kind of like different in the sense that you also need developers, but at the same time, you kind of like need TradFi finance people, business people who are going to like sort of like fund that. You know, it's like THORChain, yes, is decentralized, But like, for example, from my point of view, I'm not American, and the decentralization for me just means that I can build something centralized in my country on top of it. So maybe everything isn't going to be decentralized in that sense. Maybe you kind of like need TradFi people, and probably the best way to get TradFi people is to get them to like read something from PricewaterhouseCoopers or some other accounting firm. I don't know if you guys kind of like get what I mean. I just want to like to put that out there.
Dude, I think you're totally right. I think that some of the biggest adoption of THORChain could be from centralized entities or from people that are building on top of it to create some obscure. They want to be able to swap from Ethereum or whatever to like their random whatever, like Kenya coin, to do like microloans to African farmers, right? Like someone's going to come up with something. And it doesn't have to be completely decentralized in order to be compatible with the ethos of cryptocurrency. And it can leverage decentralized protocols like THORChain to provide benefit, to create human flourishing. But like, yeah, I think it's completely right. And I think that, I think that the line just get blurred when it comes to, like who's actually going to be the users that we need to communicate to and to convince to adopt this thing.
I really do think that the users aren't going to be like normal people. It's probably going to be organizations or most likely startups. I don't know if you get like probably not just developers or people already in the crypto space. Because like watching like Chad's video about THORFi, he was talking about how you can get a loan with it, how you can buy a car with it. Like you don't necessarily need to be into crypto to kind of like build something that leverages THORChain to be able to deliver that to people. But you'll probably only do that if you kind of like saw some accounting report or like saw something in mainstream media. And I think we should probably like, I don't know, find a way to like market more like mainstream TradFi people to get on this. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think that will come over time as people build more trust in the THORChain protocol. And I think personally, I think it'll take years for people to be able to know that they can trust THORChain, to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm going to get this 0%, this no interest, no expiration, no liquidation loan, and know that their collateral will forever be safe with it and take a long-term loan out on it. Like a lot of these things really do just take time. And we're making all the connections that need to be made in the industry, and in the TradFi world, and in the DeFi space to make that happen. So the seeds are all being planted, and it takes a while for these plants to grow, but we're getting there. Thanks, Muna. Let's go through just the speakers that are on the stage, and then that'll be it. So let's go to Juggernaut. Hey.
Hey. Everyone, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just talking for a friend, 5 years old, and so please, ED5 mod. Just a remark about crypto scholars discussion. I agree of a lot of things, that one thing is seems important for me, that there are different category of users. When you use your Visa, you don't want to know how it works. You just want to see it work, and that's all. For example, when you want to go deeper, it's yourself. You have to go deeper. Okay. I just want to go 1 mid hour before. I believe that Pluto has touched a very important point earlier. A while ago, THORChain asked an absurd but relevant question on Twitter: why TVL will never reach 100 billion dollars? The answer is simple. It means $1 billion per node. So the network entirely managed by billionaires, which is not an option. What I mean is that there is an extraordinary chance. There is time, a lot, to update.
If the network is managed by 100 billionaires who are all aligned with the ethos of open, transparent, decentralized finance, I'm okay with that.
Exactly. What I meant is that we got a chance, an extraordinary chance. There is time, a lot, to update Cosmos SDK, Tendermint, and upgrade machine. I don't know if it's what is first necessary. There is certainly a way to do better. This is also valid for Tor-likes. Of course, Maya protocol first. I'm talking about the future, of course, not about communism or anything else.
We already discussed the topic of running more than 100 validators today. We don't have to revisit that subject again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. You can go back and listen to the recording, and it's all there. And also, there was discussion on the space yesterday from that. So when this gets uploaded to YouTube later with transcripts, you can just like search for the word and just scroll through and go exactly to where we're talking about validators, if that helps you. And let's get the last question from Patrick. Hey.
Hey, thanks again for having me on twice up here. Oops, didn't mean to put my hand up. Sorry. So I just wanted to mention, actually, it's not really a question. I guess it's kind of a question, a little bit of a comment. One of the things I've been thinking about is just how important Bitcoin as an asset is to the THORChain network. It's one of the things that actually attracted me to the design of the network, and in general, just seeing a DeFi product where there's so much liquidity in Bitcoin makes me feel, I have more trust in a platform that's building around Bitcoin, and because I see Bitcoin as being money, it's really important that we get as much Bitcoin liquidity into THORChain, and so THORChain having that native Bitcoin liquidity is obviously set it apart from everybody else. I see this as a huge asset. So I guess I just wanted to mention earlier there was discussion about adding more chains. The only thing I would say is I think, looking into adding Bitcoin side chains like Rootstock and Liquid, even though they don't have a tremendous amount of adoption yet, I think it's important because it exposes, adding chains like that means you bring in that Bitcoin liquidity anyways, and you bring in more sort of like Bitcoin ecosystem. And I just think that's going to be really important for the future, so continue to bring, to build around the Bitcoin ecosystem as much as possible. So bring in RBTC, LBTC, and then if you bring in RBTC, that gives you access to sort of the other projects happening on Rootstock like Sovereign and Zero USD stablecoin. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. Appreciate you guys are doing, and also kind of curious on your thoughts around on that as well. If anyone has thoughts around, Liquid or Rootstock, BTC, or even like Lightning integration somehow. I was thinking about Lightning, but I couldn't figure out how to make that work. But just curious. Thanks.
I mean, you can get Lightning to work. THORChain can interact with any layer 1 or layer 2 or whatever. That's definitely certainly possible. The problem I think with Sovereign and Rootstock and Lightning and all these things is that the total amount of value that they have is relatively small. And so even if we were to integrate with like Rootstock, for example, I think like last time I looked, they had like, I think it was like 1,000 or 2,000 Bitcoin total in the entire network, which is, about twice what THORChain was at the same time, and we're earlier and younger than they are. Like at some point, to me, it's almost inevitable that THORChain will have more Bitcoin in THORChain than any other decentralized product, or even maybe out there, more so than Rootstock and Sovereign and like Lightning Network and all these things, Liquid Network, all these things. And so at that point, it's like, is it really valuable to connect with the Lightning Network when how much more Bitcoin can be added to the network? Well, maybe not that much. So then it just becomes like a root cause, a root analysis of like, what is the ROI here? How much more value can we get put into the network? if we integrate with like Light Network or Liquid Network or whatever.
Well, that's true. And the only reason I bring that up is because if THORChain is that successful, then you guys could be incredibly important to the success of those side chains as well.
Yeah, and maybe we'll do it. Like, I don't know. Like, that's up to the community to decide. I know, like Pluto was talking earlier about, like, he's a little bit defensive towards adding new chains or layer twos in general. For the most part, that's true, and so like that just becomes like a community debate of like, what are the things we want to interface with it? Is it rootstock? Is it sovereign? Is it like Atrium or whatever it's called? Like all these other things, like it just becomes a community debate. While the room price is relatively small, like right now, like there's actually been a big push in the validators to get off of AWS and DigitalOcean because it's just so expensive to run infrastructure there. And there's been a big push lately of a lot of nodes moving from cloud-based validators to becoming bare metal, because bare metal is just like tons and tons cheaper, and it becomes much more like economical for you to run a validator as bare metal than it is on AWS. So like, while the room price is small, you're probably not going to see us adding a lot of chains because this can make it too expensive to be an operator. You just won't be operating in profit. But maybe in 5 years or something like this, when the room price is considerably higher than it is now, then we can talk about adding arbitrary chains like Light Network and that kind of stuff. That's up for a future community to discuss and debate and make a determination on.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it'd be super cool to see that. I know you're thinking about that a lot, Pluto, too, with Lightning Network. Like, I think the further and more entrenched we can be into the whole Bitcoin space, just the better that is for THORChain. Yeah, because right now, like, how many Bitcoiners are out there talking about? I mean, not that there's zero, because there certainly are a good number of Bitcoiners that know and probably use THORChain and are probably pooling on THORChain and making swaps there. But it just takes that broader community adoption to be part of the whole Bitcoin ecosystem, and Lightning somehow is like a core like pillar of that Bitcoin ecosystem, even though it's much more centralized and has its own problems and things. But I would love to see it on THORChain one day.
Like, maybe that's the play, that like Lightning won't offer much economic value to the THORChain network, but it would offer marketing value. And so by adding Light Network, it would become more in the minds of Bitcoiners in some sense. Maybe that's the play. Like, I don't know. That's part of the debate.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and so far the strategy we've taken with like adding new chains has largely just been like, what do we think is going to be successful? And so, although we try to look at things like, like we look at AVAX, and like the result of adding AVAX has been pretty underwhelming. And there's probably some reasons for that, but I think it's just because like we didn't really have enough like hype from within their community or like awareness. Like, they didn't really do much to like even talk about kind of like what we were doing for them. And so like, I guess they just didn't care about having access to native BTC or the entire Cosmos ecosystem. Whatever the case, like there's going to be certain times when adding a new chain is not just like a purely economical decision, when it could be that just like our strategies our communities are really well aligned with them, and it just seems like a natural synergy, and they have access to a user base that that would bring a lot of new users to the ecosystem. I think we also need to start thinking but more like scientifically about like how we like, if we're going to remove chains, for example. I think there's some chains right now that aren't even like their fees, that they're not even like breaking even on the amount of fees attributable to the pool that is received by node operators does not equal the amount of expenditure that they run to run the chains every month, in the cloud. And so like there's some chains that are just like straight up losing money for everyone. It's losing money for the network because we're paying block rewards into the pools, and that's drawing down the reserve faster that could be used to juice rewards on other pools. And the infrastructure to run those isn't even worth like the fees that are resulting from them. So I think we just need to get a little bit smarter about deciding what chains to add to the network.
Yeah, that's actually a problem that's been over the years, right? Altcoin exchanges, they add tokens and eventually they have to delist them, if you've been here long enough, you've seen a lot of altcoins pumped even to the top 10. And today, top 10 coins are not even listed on exchanges anymore that were top 10 7 or 8 years ago. And so, yeah, that's why I do see, that's why I guess anything that brings in more Bitcoin liquidity is exciting to me, because Bitcoin's always been the top dog, whether that's RBTC or Liquid BTC or brings it through Lightning, it's always going to be around. So you add those things, they're never going away. Thanks.
I do see, though, like things like AVAX, for example, that maybe we didn't see as much adoption as we would have liked to see. Like, I do see some like chains like that being kind of like loading the spring. And so, like, once THORChain kind of has its moment in the sun and it's getting talked about a lot and kind of like Terra did or Solana did and like the last bull cycle, that we have all these springs that are just loaded that, like, once we kind of hit that kind of inflection point and we kind of take off as a rocket in some sense, that like all those chains that are currently losing money on, as Pluto was saying, will become very profitable. Like even something like Lightning or Bitcoin Cash, like in that hypothetical scenario, would all of a sudden become profitable, right? So it's not so much that, like, it doesn't matter so much to me if we get the economic value like on day one, although obviously that's obviously much better. It is possible that those things break out like downstream once we're more popular as a network.
Cool, guys. Great space today. Thanks everyone for coming on. This will be on YouTube in a couple hours. And yeah, we'll have more spaces talking about lending. So if you didn't get to ask your question today, sorry about that. And we'll have plenty more spaces in the future. So just keep an eye on the Twitter. And you'll see when new spaces are coming out. We'll do things on Discord and here on Twitter. Other than that, any closing thoughts, guys? That's it for me.
I'd say everybody just keep reading about lending and like studying it, and ask me questions on Twitter or jump on the Discord or whatever. I'm happy to answer as many questions as I possibly can to make sure that our community is informed and educated on this topic as much as possible. So keep on like poking at it and asking questions, and the better you understand it, the better it is for the community, for sure.
Wow, Chad, that's quite a departure from your usual attitude. What do we do? Ship it.
No,
I can't believe you just said we should. I can't believe you just said we should read and like review things.
No, I've always been that way. I've always explained every major feature that came out. I think with you, I always tell you to ship it because you and the rest of the Nine Realms team is asking hesitant and like just dragging your feet sometimes, and it's a little bit frustrating at times. But I'm just like, come on, guys, we've been talking about this for 3 fucking months now. I mean, like, come on, let's just move forward here.
Well, you have to. Us smooth brains need some extra time to get hit by the lightning bolt. But when it hits,
this is what literally happens every time we have a new feature on THORChain.
When it hits, it hits, man.
Nine Realms is like immediately they're like against it, whether it be savers or lending or like synths or any of these things. And then I had to fly out to fucking Denver or fly out to Austin and sit in a room for 9 fucking hours and explain this shit ad nauseum to the Nine Realms team, and then they finally understand it and they finally get it and they finally see the value and see where it works.
It's just Chad. It's just a smoke screen because we like hanging out with you so much. We want to see you more.
All right. I mean, I'll take that as a compliment, I suppose.
I'm still mad we didn't do pool spaces, guys.
Yeah. Too bad.
Dude, that would have been awesome. We should. I know. I was looking forward to the pool spaces, but I forgot I had a flight I got to catch. We
were gonna do a live stream from inside of a pool, but then Chad, we woke up and we were so pumped to do it, and Chad literally like left a note on the dresser and was like, "See you later."
Yeah, we were gonna like get masks at the store so everybody could like keep their non-doc status and just like party in the pool. And then we had this like there's a super hot girl that was like managing the house or whatever. I can't remember her name, whatever.
Chad.
And we were gonna tell everybody that I was Lena.
Yeah, dude.
Like, who's the hot chick in the background? We were like, that's fucking Lena.
Dude. That would have been the best troll
Oh my
ever.
god, that would have been so hilarious.
I had such a sweet unicorn pool floaty picked out for that too.
Oh, dude, that would have been so epic. I would have I'm so sorry we didn't actually able to put it together because I was laughing my ass off so fucking hard.
Hey, that was Pool Spaces V1. We need to get to Pool Spaces V8 before we ship it. So it's going to be a little while.
Yeah, nice.
All right, guys.
Later.
Always a
Thanks,
pleasure.
guys. Great space.
Peace.